Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. The sun was just showing its orange edge above the horizon. Wendy was already up. She was accustomed to getting up before dawn and had plenty of things to do by lunchtime. And in the village it was impossible to live differently because the relatives were the ones who liked to go low in bed. The neighbors looked, to put it mildly, with disapproval. However, William, Wendy's husband, looked down on local Moors as he thought that these rules did not apply to him personally. On this August morning, he too resented his wife's impetuous activities. Without opening his eyes, he shouted from under the blanket, "Wendy, what kind of person are you? Thinking only of yourself." The woman parried without delay. "If I thought only of myself, you would have starved to death long ago or covered yourself with beauty from dirt." The man was not well versed in the terms that his mistress liked to flaunt, but he knew unmistakably that beneath the city lurked something terrible with fear and loathing. He was as shaken as if he had been drinking bitter for a week. So, as befitted a real man, he decided to voice a second objection to his half. "Wendy, I wonder if it gives you pleasure to frighten me and my daughter. Where did you learn such words? You live with you, and you'll learn a lot of things. What about you? What about your darling? My daughter's used to riding on my backbone. But at some point this song must end, because my patience is not infinite." The woman deftly picked up with one hand at once 4 cans and the same number of 3-liter containers. It turned out that in her other hand at the contact of glass and surrendered a nasty squeaking sound, from which William again twitched. In a burst of indignant emotion, he threw back the blanket. The man pounded his fist on his knee, hoping that it would have the desired effect on his spouse. "Wendy, are you doing this on purpose? You know what that scraping does to me. Couldn't you have prepared the damn jars last night or at least carried them one at a time?" William was outraged. It seemed to him that Wendy was deliberately getting on his nerves to bring him to a scandal. And there's nothing to make a scandal of. Total disrespect for the head of the house. With no regard for her husband's displeasure, the women took the dishes out onto the veranda and returned to the long room in which William had been fond of seclusion for some time. Wendy flopped her plump arms against her sides, and it gave the man a childish thrill. "Wendy, you have no idea how stunning you look right now, all against the backdrop of the rising sun. If you still had a paddle in your right hand, then the woman's eyes would glisten menacingly. Or hey, you Mozart of a man. I can run to the barn for a paddle if I need one. Or my daughter, she's happy to carry it. But I don't think you'll be happy with this object." William, after these words, skewed again, and his right eye even twitched. He realized that he had mentioned the paddle in vain. And to switch the conversation in more favorable directions, he decided to demonstrate his knowledge of creativity in front of his wife. "Wendy, Mozart was a composer, not an artist. You can't be so ignorant. Yeah, I don't give a damn who suffered what when painting a woman with a paddle. You jump one day, you take me out and I'll turn you in." Though from the lips of his wife, more than once sounded such threats. The man couldn't get used to them. The fact is that William had from birth a very fine mental tuning, and he tried to get through to the consciousness of his beloved Wendy. "I don't know why I've earned such deep disrespect from you. I'm your legal spouse, and where are you going to put me if I'm not a bad person?" Wendy sighed. "You, William, without the law. Normal husbands at least do something useful at home, and you are a bum all day long, stinking with excess of feelings." The woman exclaimed, "And told me, Mama Wendy, don't marry that guy. I didn't listen to her. I believed in love. And now I pray. You're William, like a parasite sucking on my body." The man's patience broke, and he jumped up from the sail of the long sofa. "Wendy, there's a limit to everything. You're crossing every line by insulting me." Replying to Wendy in the same tone of voice that she had been carrying on the conversation with him, William simply could not. In the first place, because he has a delicate mental organization, and secondly, if Wendy got angry enough, something heavy might fly. Woman smirked, "Parasite. FYI, is not a swear word. It's just an underdeveloped creature that can't do anything. Sounds exactly like your portrait to me, William. You've been a leech on me for 22 years, and you're not coming off. Wendy went proudly to the veranda, and William could not find his composure after such unfair insults to his wife. But he wasn't going to give up, so he pulled on a tank top for the house and followed his wife. Wendy, let's talk like civilized people for once in our lives. The man became so emotional that his pathologically thin legs began to twitch spontaneously. Wendy laughed. William, don't be ridiculous. Why are you kicking around like a horse? If you have to go to the bathroom, run to the bathroom, or you'll have an accident. Wendy was making fun of him. Not the first day. It's not the first day. Not for years. Every Monday, William swore to himself that he'd be different. He'd have everything remodeled, so that he'd be a new man. Not even Wendy. But the urge passed quickly. All that was left was laziness, and William calmly postponed his makeover until the following Monday. By the law of the genre, it was up to William to say the next line. But the appearance behind William's back radically changed the mise-en-scene. The girl wiped her eyes with the back of her palm and stared at the ancient walkers seen on the wall. Oh my God, what are parents really talking about? Shouting at such an early hour, while the head of the family scratched the back of his head and thought about how to respond to a fair comment from his daughter, Wendy with a sneer said, I'm another family of parasites, raised his voice all over the field like a clone. Father and daughter exchanged a glance that did not escape Wendy's attention. She was shoving the cucumbers into the jars with exasperation, but this process was automatic because all her attention was focused on the troublemaker. Daughter, at your age, you should know that a normal woman who cares about the welfare of her family should get up early. And you shouldn't take an example from your father, who's about to get ulcers on his flanks. William didn't let her mother finish. She in one leap overcame the distance between her and her mother and hung on her mother's neck. Darling, don't start the morning with a scandal. I understood your hint, and I'm ready to always be equal to you, to say what at this minute I can help you. Wendy threw into the basin 2 cucumbers, which did not fit into the jar. You scumbag, Lisa, you know how to get on my pain in the ass. Well, if it's asking for it, there's a job for you. Only first tidy yourself, bring obeyed, and obeyed the girl smacked, but break in the cheek and ran to dress. Wendy looked sadly at her husband. Our daughter has grown up, and you and I have not noticed. William caught the change in his wife's mood. He immediately decided to take advantage of the temporary truce to consolidate it. This, Wendy, is the law of life. We get older, the kids get older, so it's time for you to change your tactics. Your commands aren't working anymore, and it's embarrassing. After all, except for me, you have no one closer, and you all wagering, all on me. The woman looked fondly at her husband. What could she take from him? She knew very well what an underdog he was. But love is evil. All right, William, I'll give you credit for sucking up. I'll try not to push you. Now, do me a favor. Put the water tank on the gas. The man rushed to do the job, but in the excitement of labor, he didn't fit in. He poked at the doorway and began to rub his bruised, long forehead vigorously. A woman came in and burst out laughing. No, this is overkill after all. Underdogs come in many varieties, but her husband outdid them all. Why are you so clumsy? Run to the refrigerator. They put it in the freezer, or you'll get a black eye. I don't want the neighbors to think I'm being abusive. Cursing the narrow doors and his fate, the man rushed into the kitchen. A few seconds later, a sound came from there, from which it was easy to tell that the freezer had also given the owner of the house an unpleasant surprise. Wendy shook her head. God, at least they put a personal nanny on the man. He can't do anything human. He's liable to make himself an invalid. Then it's the end of the line. The mistress quickly told the jars and removed yesterday's harvest of cucumbers and appreciated her work with pleasure. Well, now it's all in order. It remains to make the brine as loud as possible. The woman shouted to Lisa, I need your help. Get the salt and vinegar. From the back of the house, there came the sound of Mom's now, and in less than a minute, William appeared on the veranda with a packet of salt in his hands. Wendy's cheerful mood instantly vanished. "What have you got on your mind?" Wendy looked at her daughter with the same look she had recently given her father. Lisa was surprised. "Salt, like you asked. It's extra. Pickles need regular coarse salt. Didn't you know that?" William was not confused. "Imagine, Mom didn't know. I don't can cucumbers and tomatoes every day. And I've hated all kinds of vegetables and jam since I was a kid." Wendy even turned pale with surprise, her eyes narrowed unkindly. "But now she's gonna get it from Daddy's little girl too." "Oh, now you're talking, are you? Got a taste of city life. But that's okay. I'll bring you back to your senses in no time. As soon as I see your rations, you'll love pickles and cottage cheese." Lisa realized she had gone too far. She pouted capriciously and snuggled up to her mother's shoulder. The girl looked like a sly fox. "Mommy, you've got it all wrong. And I'm not refusing to help you, but I can't keep everything in one head at once. I have to memorize so much information a day at work that by evening I forget my own name. And you're talking to me about salt." The head of the household came from around the corner. "It's true, Harry, you're on the girl's ass early in the morning. You want me to go to the store and get some salt. Give me the money. I'll be right back." Wendy gave her husband a scornful look. "Just in case, let the goat in the garden. William, you and money are incompatible. And the stores still close. Let Lisa go to her grandmother. She always has salt and sugar in stock." The girl raised her eyebrows in surprise. "Why, Mom?" Her mother looked at her daughter condescendingly. "You are certainly not of this world. It seems that all your life lived in the royal palace. It's good for the soil. It's also used to control various plant pests. William is more confident now. In short, the daughter goodness is transferred to one known substance." William knew that now the parents would again clash in a verbal duel, but did not wait for this moment. Going to the woman at the wall was a convenient excuse to get away from home for a while. Although she disliked her father's mother, but in the current situation it was better to meet with a harmful babushka than to listen to the scolding of her parents. Although the village was fundamentally no different from 1,000 similar settlements, a few peculiarities that gave color to this place could still be distinguished. The first peculiarity was strong family traditions. This meant that all significant events were celebrated here in a big way, and the number of invitees sometimes reached up to 100 people, if not more. By the way, according to the last census, the population of the village was almost 2,000 people, which even by modern standards corresponded to a large settlement. And if to the bulk of the residents to add their urban relatives, you can imagine the scale of weddings, anniversaries, which were regularly celebrated here. Therefore, the catering facility continued to operate successfully in the village. During the day, it functioned as a regular canteen, and in the evening it was used to celebrate a significant event. Local youth also liked to gather in the cozy hall, where you could have a good time without parental supervision. The second village peculiarity was a consequence of the first. Each new generation simply had to memorize these very traditions in order to pass this heritage on to their scumbags. Personal likes or dislikes were not taken into account in this very situation after marriage. It turned out that Wendy, a girl madly in love with the local accordion player, William never once thought about what kind of relationship she would have with her mother-in-law. Wendy Kelly's mother more than once warned her daughter, "Wendy, you can't go with your feelings. William is not what you think he is. He's weak and weak. A husband like that will be hard to live with. But his mother's a real hellcat." There was nothing superfluous in the characterization that the elementary school teacher gave to the future relative. On the contrary, to this description it was possible to add many more remarkable features that possessed the main scandalist of the village. After all, the nursery was feared not only by adults, it frightened naughty children, for example. And you'd often hear that if you didn't eat all the porridge, Molly will come and take you away for re-education. The name Molly was given to the old woman long after she arrived in the village. Then Molly distinguished herself by calling all the inhabitants of this wonderful place with a capacious word Kelly to her husband, who decided to wait out the hard times in her homeland. She said, "Where did you bring me? There's only Kelly here who's studying. Not a single normal face." Since then, the villagers have held a grudge against the wife of the new collective farm chairman. However, he soon disappeared from the family nest with his mistress, leaving behind his wife and young son. But the villagers did not pity the abandoned and took the side of the traitor. Any man would run away from such a beast. Not only does she consider herself superior to others, but she calls everyone names. To this conclusion, someone added a succinct, "Molly. She is Molly," so carelessly thrown against the wall, and the word stuck to her. And William became known as Kelly's son. The boy was very shy and took the offensive nickname with shame. Many times he tried to reason with his mother. "Mom, you shouldn't swear. I'm not fighting with the neighbors. If you don't care about your own reputation, think of me." Molly didn't recognize anyone's opinion, so her son's request was like a red rag on a bull. "It's not for you to tell me what's wrong. Your daddy ran off and dumped everything on me. I've been working my ass off. I'm trying to make things right for you. And instead of gratitude, I get complaints." Indeed, her mother spared nothing for William. True, the high maternal love she showed not so much for the sake of sincere care for her son, but in order to rub the neighbors' noses in it. After all, no one in the village wanted to communicate with her. Even the nearest neighbors avoided her. If they happened to meet on the same road to visit her house, no one visited them either. Even William's school buddies categorically refused such offers. The boy was very worried about this, and his mother calmed him down. "Nothing, William. We'll get through this. I'll show them all who I am. Let them choke on their envy. I'll dance on their graves one day." The boy shuddered as he pictured this horrifying scene, but said nothing to the mother on the wall was one of those women who do not throw words to the wind. She began to slowly put her plan into action. William's mother worked at the very same catering establishment that had a dual purpose because there was always a lot of food waste. She decided to use them for her own good. "Mommy, why did you take them? Who will look after this animal?" The woman with a nonchalant look answered, "How we will take care of them. We'll see how it goes. Then we can have a pig for a uterus." Things went well, but most of the work fell on William's shoulders, and the boy couldn't wait till he graduated. Things got worse when his mother bought a cow. "William, look what a beauty I've brought. Now we'll have fresh milk and sour cream." Although the son did not share his mother's joy, he had to accept the cow. The boy's life became unbearable, and his mother treated him like a hired laborer. "William, you cook for the winter. Hay for the little ones. Buy you a moped." And he'd jump up early in the morning to do his mother's errands. After all, riding around the village on a moped was the dream of every teenager at that time. Very soon, William replaced the moped with a real motorcycle, and later he got a car. Having a personal vehicle increased William's self-esteem. The attitude towards him in the village changed drastically too. Now he did not lower his eyes to the ground, but walked with his head held high, listening to the admiring comments of his fellow villagers. "Look how the boy has changed. It's the life-giving power. The power of money. You might say he's the best at what he does." William also firmly believed in the power of money and began to treat mother with more reverence. In the fall, I enjoyed the care of her son, and she generously paid for this pleasure. It would seem that all acute issues in the family were eliminated. It remained only to decide on the choice of profession. William knew that his mother in her dreams sees him as a zoo technician, but he could not change his own childhood dream. After all, even at school, the boy brightly showed himself different talents. He sang well and tap danced dashingly. Kelly noticed the gifted boy in elementary school and always nominated him for the role of the host of school events. William perfectly coped with the most difficult text, for which he was recognized by the entire teaching staff. "Med will go far. Such a talent. He should be in good hands." One day, a whole delegation from the Regional School of Culture came to their school. Kelly decided not to miss such an opportunity. She showed the boy to the people who knew him. At the request of the teacher, William unashamedly demonstrated his skills in singing and dancing. The visitors were delighted and applauded the young nugget for a long time. When the applause died down, one important uncle asked his boy, "What would you like to be in the future?" William felt his importance because no one had ever talked to him on such important topics before. And his mother kept waving him away. "You don't understand anything about life yet. It will be as I say." And William had a dream of his own, because the man who asked the question inspired confidence. The boy blurted out, "I want to play the flute." The man raised an eyebrow in surprise and approvingly noted a good wish. "Let your father have you for now. And when you grow up, come to us." The soul feast was over before it had really begun. William lowered his eyes in shame. "My dad left me and my mom and took the harmonica with him." It was said with such intonation that the representative of the school could not understand what upset the child more: the departure of the father from the family or the disappearance of the musical instrument. Kelly was present during this conversation. She felt sorry for the boy to the core and invited him to visit. William was ready to cry, partly because no one had ever invited him to her home before. He broke the news to his mother. "I was invited to my house by our teacher on the wall." Molly looked at her son sidelong. "Well, go. Maybe they'll give you something tasty to eat. But don't stay there too long." That same evening, William went to visit. Kelly welcomed him warmly and introduced him to her daughter. Wendy made a lasting impression on the boy. The girl was not only good-looking, but she knew a lot of interesting stories about travelers and different animals. Despite the fact that she was 2 years younger than William, her knowledge exceeded the boy's horizons. After a hearty dinner that Kelly had prepared, the children marveled in the tick room, and William forgot about the existence of time. He arrived home later than his mother's appointed hour, for which he received a scolding from her. "What time did I tell you to be home?" William habitually lowered his eyes and, with a tremor in his voice, fed back to his family. "But I didn't notice." His mother raised her voice and even took a swing at him, something she had never allowed herself before. "Would you remember what I'm telling you? You'll stay home for a week. No going out, no visitors." During that time, just to subtract the pigs was the cruelest punishment. But William had no idea that his mother would go even further. The next day, during the big break, he saw his parents talking to Kelly, as the woman was actively gesticulating with her hands. The kid realized that he should not expect anything good from this visit. From a bad feeling, William, all inside, went cold, and he even hid under the stairs so that his mother would not find him. He stayed in this hiding place until the end of school, but he was still unable to escape home unnoticed. In the vestibule, he was detained by the teacher, said calmly, "William, skipping classes without a good reason is not good. By the way, your mom came to school today. She complained that you don't help her around the house." The boy was filled with indignation, and he shouted, "I help her by cleaning up after the pigs. If you knew how much I hate them." 2 large tears rolled down his tanned cheeks in peace. The teacher didn't hold back. She drew the boy to her. "William, you can't do that. It's not the animal's fault that your mom makes you do hard work, is it? You realize it's very hard on her alone, so she can be a little hard sometimes. We try not to argue with her as much as we can. Help." An unpleasant thought ran through William's mind. All adults for one. Here's Kelly running over to my mom's side. He wanted to think about something important, but he didn't have time, because the teacher said with a smile on her face, "Wendy was asking about you. You can come visit us anytime if your mom will let you." Only a few days later, William learned from casual witnesses that his mother had come upon the world Kelly. She reproached the teacher for leading other people's children astray. Despite the fact that he had always felt awe before his mother, the desire to restore justice was stronger. That's when he had his first confrontation with Kelly Wall. "Mom hurt the teacher for some reason. She's the kindest and she's nice to me. She has a cool daughter. She wants to be friends with me because I have no friends at all. He looked at his mother in an adult way, and for the first time she couldn't take it. Her imperious tone suddenly changed to a mumbling tone. "And you were his voice. Do I mind your teacher? Not at all. You can be friends with a bald devil, but only without harming the house." Thus was won the first victory over his crazy mother. William won his second victory by enrolling in a cultural school. Mother had to accept this fact. He returned to his native village after 3 years, a well-trained worker of the cultural front, and was immediately appointed director of the club. After this reinforcement, Molly became a very prominent figure in the village, and neighbors began to greet her. Even Miranda, who was considered the main troublemaker, now with respect, was paying her back. "Good day to you, Molly. How is William feeling in his new position?" Though such questions were like a balm to the heart, the woman answered them without her former arrogance, but with dignity. "He has already settled in. He wants to create a team. He was promised new instruments in the region." Miranda's little eyes sparkled. "An instrument is good, of course, but a good bride is even better," Miranda giggled. And Molly felt her heart seize up frantically in her chest. Just the thought of anyone daring to take her son away from her. It was panic-inducing. Forgetting her manners, the woman began to question the gossip with relish. "Miranda, if you know something, spill it nicely." Miranda's eyes went wide. "Oh, you don't know that your William is head over heels in love with the teacher's daughter." Her ears flinched because she had expected to hear a better argument. "Surprised the hedgehog in one place. I thought you knew something I didn't. It's the little things. William has been friends with Wendy since childhood, but my son is not thinking about getting married." Miranda made unthinkable eye movements again. "That's what you think. Young people these days love surprises. I once saw them kissing sweetly in the meadow by the river. Maybe they've already given you a grandchild, and you have no idea." Miranda was triumphant. Molly stood in the middle of the street at a loss. An inner voice insistently told her that William was a grown man, and you could not hold him by force. So accept the future fate of your mother-in-law. But Molly was not accustomed to surrender without a fight. She decided in advance that she would arrange a fun life for her future daughter-in-law. The woman knew perfectly well that the son easily falls under any influence, so she decided to preempt the actions of the enemy and to search for a convenient bride. Of course, Wendy herself did not suspect the secret plans of William's mother. She was finishing her studies at the veterinary school and came home only on holidays and vacations. Kelly was raising her daughter alone, and she didn't have extra money for Wendy's weekly trips. The girl learned all the news from her mother during long-distance conversations. One day, Wendy asked how William was doing. "He's visiting you." The question took the woman by surprise, and she answered with feigned cheerfulness. "Yes, I'm busy at work all the time, and William has no free time. Our villagers tell us he's going to start an orchestra. It's all about the instruments." Wendy realized that her mother was trying to avoid a direct answer. She didn't bother her with questions and quickly said goodbye. The girl came to the village for the weekend to see if the rumors that had reached her were true. And if you believe the rumors, her beau was not bored and even found a replacement for her. So the first thing she did was not go to school, to please her mother with her arrival, and went to the club. In the hearth of rural culture was in full swing rehearsal. Local talents, mostly unmarried girls, selflessly sang, and the young director of the club inspiredly played the accordion. There seemed to be nothing objectionable in the picture. But on the throwing of the eyes, Wendy immediately figured out the rival. She turned out to be Miranda's daughter, a former classmate. For this girl is firmly entrenched unkind word student. According to unconfirmed information, that C was not squeamish married men. And one day, one of the cheating wives gave her a dark one. People said that the woman so withdrew Love Maiden that she did not show on the street for a month. This story was then tried to be hushed up. The victim's mother told everyone that her daughter was attacked by hooligans. "You can't imagine, kind people, what these freaks did to my daughter. Not only did they take my purse and earrings, they broke my nose." Sympathizers asked a fair question. Why didn't they report the attack to the police? Miranda was confused and said the wrong thing. So he was on vacation, and when he came back, it was too late to look for the bandit. But the villagers, especially the women, understood perfectly well why Miranda didn't want to make a fuss. Later, the whole truth came out, but the daughter and her mother were not embarrassed by this fact. But it seems that Adriana did not learn her lesson well, and once again began to hunt for other people's husbands and fiancés. That's what Wendy thought, watching the rehearsals from a niche at the very end of the auditorium, which was not visible from the stage. The amateur group performed several famous songs under the accordion, and William thanked the girls. "Thank you all. The next rehearsal is on Friday." The girls rushed to the exit. Only Miranda remained on stage. The girl had a cheeky smile on her face and headed for the principal. "William, I don't remember my part very well. Maybe you can work with me individually." The young man was surprised at the tone. "I didn't notice any faults in your performance. You sing exactly according to the notes, and that's why." That is, she took another step and walked straight into the director. In a languid voice, she said, "William, if I can do everything without a hitch, why don't you make me a soloist?" While the young man thought about what to say, she threw her arms around his shoulders. Wendy could no longer calmly watch the insolent damsel make an attempt on her fiancé. She resolutely came out of hiding and headed toward the stage. "Is this how you rehearse?" William threw down his arms with longing. "Wendy, when did you get here?" "Right off the train and straight here." Wendy walked onto the stage, leaving her rival with an appraising stare. "Adriana, what are you batting your eyes at? Go under the bench." Such treatment angered the unformed soloist, and she, with her usual impudence, declared, "And who are you to tell me what to do? By the way, the club is a public place, and anyone can come here. A person can, but you can't." "Why is that?" Adriana stared at William, but he hurriedly averted his eyes. Wendy realized that she had the last word. "So the whole point is that you don't fit the definition of a human, by all accounts. And this animal feeds on carrion." Adriana, eyes bulging. "William, tell me, have you at least a word?" Young man has already fully come to normal and tried without prejudice to divorce the warring parties. "Girls, there's no need to quarrel." "Adriana, I'll see you on Friday." "And about the soliloquy?" "I'll have to think about it," although there were no witnesses to the fight at the club. The whole village knew about it in great detail by evening. Kelly read Wendy's daughter. A self-respecting girl should be above such squabbles. "Frankly, I didn't expect you to be so outrageous. You're imposing on William." Wendy was not even offended at her mother and reasonably noted, "Mommy, you measure everything by outdated standards. It's a different time, and you have to fight for your happiness." The always poised Kelly lost her temper this time. "And you think William is worth fighting for? He's neither fish nor flesh." "A little bit. Is that what he is? You'll be lost with him because he can't stand up for himself, let alone his family. So be it. I like him just the way he is." Kelly knew it was pointless to change her daughter's mind, but she still hoped there would be another girl. Besides Adriana, those terms that would fascinate William. The solution, the exact same problem William's mother was battling. Since the number 107 did not transpire, she was feverishly searching for a replacement for her candidacy, and time was working against her. Complicating matters was the fact that after Antonina was rudely knocked off, Wendy Miranda stopped noticing Autumn trying to establish a relationship with her. William's mother was the first to make a move toward reconciliation. She showed up at the lost Miranda's house herself. "Are you blowing on me? I don't even know who I am." That Wendy just drove in from somewhere and showed up out of the blue. The woman spoke so sincerely that Miranda believed her. "Are you telling the truth? You didn't build this. Shame on me. I got baptized. God be with you. How could I do such a thing? What do you want?" "I swear, on my cow." Miranda laughed heartily. "Amazing things are happening. I never thought a cow could be more valuable than a person. Usually you swear on your mom or someone else in the family, and you're offering your cow. unsurprised. The relationship between the buddies had matured. Together, they began to devise a plan to neutralize the unwanted bride. But their devious schemes were not to come to fruition. Because William and Wendy filed an application, they decided not to inform their mothers about it, so that there would be no unforeseen circumstances. William was the one who was most worried about it. "Wendy, I think we'd better not wake the beast. I mean my mother. You know what she's capable of. So say on the eve of the wedding, and I don't think we need to make a big show of it for the whole village. Why waste money? We'll need it ourselves." William hadn't expected such a turn, but he was delighted with the woman he'd chosen. "Wendy, you're a unique girl. Everyone dreams of a wedding, a big dress, and all the trimmings. But you don't." The girl flicked the groom on the nose. "William, I'm just rational." The date of the painting was approaching, and the young had to reveal their secret. Kelly took this news not that with joy, but tolerable. But Molly didn't even shy away from her sister-in-law. She walked in without a whimper. "Oh, what on earth is going on? Mother's the last to know he's getting married. Do I deserve to be treated like this? Or do you value a pebble more than your mother?" William tried to calm his mother, who continued to rebuke him. "What am I going to do alone nowadays? Dashenka." Wendy was tired of these wailing, and she decided to say her weighty word. "We will help you, albeit not with hope." She looked at the girl. "You will. I always keep my promises." Then Wendy did not realize that she was signing her own verdict. The future mother-in-law, having broken her promise to her, was not appeased. She wanted to talk to the wedding party face to face, too. In the evening of the same day, she, bringing with her a bottle on olives of her own making, came to visit Kelly when receiving guests. In the olden days, it was customary to give the bride a viewing, and I'm honoring the traditions of my ancestors, so to speak. Wendy's mother cordially invited the future relative into the house. "Come by the wall, Molly. I'm all for observing customs, too." "Then that's where we'll start." The guest went into the kitchen and put a pour on the table. "What's this for conversation?" The woman sat down on the hostess's table, making it clear that the deciding vote was hers. Kelly did not object to this order. "I'm ready to hear you out, not Molly. And my intuition tells me that you intend to talk about the fate of our children." The guest spat the palm of her hand on the capital. "Exactly. And I'll tell you right away, dear world, Kelly, that I'm dissatisfied with what? Everything. First of all, I don't like the fact that there's not going to be a wedding. Just think what people will say about us." Wendy's mother chuckled. "They'll probably say we're stingy, sparing money." In the fall, Molly came to life. "That's right. That's what I mean. Of course, your salary is low and you can't afford much." The landlady interrupted her guest. "Why do you draw such conclusions? We live quite normally, not worse than others." The guest snidely remarked, "And what kind of dowry will you give? A washing machine or a vacuum cleaner?" Kelly shrugged her shoulders. "What's wrong with household appliances? I think every family needs such appliances." William's mother stretched out on a chair, her face dreaming and her tongue loose from the olives she had drunk. So she decided to come clean. "And me to you, honored one. You're a teacher, but you don't understand anything about life. Today, everything is decided by money. Without it, you can't go anywhere." The guest reached for the bottle, but Kelly covered her glass with her palm. "Thank you. That's enough for me. What's your pleasure? I'll have some more. Don't think I'm into this stuff. No, God forbid. And my husband was a non-drinker, a very decent man. Then why did he leave you and your son? Who knows? He was always missing something. He said I looked like a soldier. All I had of a woman was my looks. So he ran after women who didn't live up to him. Well, that's in the past. And now I care about the fate of my only son. He's used to getting everything without refusal. I bought him a motorcycle for years and then a car. And recently I gave him a German accordion. You have no idea how much such an instrument costs. In the region they promised to give him a good accordion. But they brought such junk. So I bought him a present. In the fall, Molly took in more air, as if preparing to jump into the water. Of course, a wedding is a special event, so the gift should be special. I've been thinking and thinking for a long time, and I've come to the conclusion that you and I should give the children a house. Kelly, ouch, that's a surprise. Unfortunately, it's beyond me. I don't have the means. The guest rejoiced. I didn't expect any other answer from you. You intellectuals, not accustomed to labor, and I all my conscious life back, and do not develop. And all for the sake of my only son. I've kept piglets and cows in the compartment. That's why I have money. Kelly got suspicious. What are you trying to say? That even though you are a teacher, but in fact you are a shill, which behind your soul you have nothing. The hostess began to lose her nerve. She wanted to just take and throw this smug fool out the door. But her upbringing did not allow her to stoop to such an act. Kelly very politely but firmly said, Molly, living room. I understand what you wanted to tell me. My daughter and I are not trying to infiltrate your family and do not claim your money. In principle, I am absolutely indifferent to what you give your children for the wedding. I don't think we should interfere with them. Let them decide for themselves whether love or money is more important to them. William's mother realized that the conversation was over. She rose reluctantly from her chair and took the half-empty bottle of tincture from the table. Without saying goodbye to the hostess, the guests left. Kelly still for a long time recollected in her memory separate moments of the conversation. She decided not to tell their daughter about the visit of her future mother-in-law. A few days later, the young couple married. The event was celebrated in the village canteen, which on holidays worked as a restaurant. Despite the narrow circle of invited gifts, there were many. Kelly gave the newlyweds a modern washing machine, which soothed the laundry itself. William's mother handed over a set of bed linens and a set of knives. The guests were outraged by such an act, because village people believed in omens and knew that a knife is a symbol of disease and trouble. Therefore, such items should not be given to loved ones. From the stories of Lisa's mother, knew they were already in the character of Kelly's grandmother. Of course, Wendy was silent about many things. For example, she did not tell their daughter about how her grandmother made a conspiracy on her. Nor did she talk about the little tricks like chicken feathers and needles that her mother-in-law had slipped into hidden places during her visits while Kelly was alive. Wendy still tried to influence her husband's mother. She helped her around the house and once rescued a cow. Then the poisonous pincers of guilt set in. But instead of gratitude, the daughter-in-law was always reprimanded with a caustic remark. Wendy, don't try to sound smarter than you are. But I did. So what? Drumming now. That's no mean feat. I could have handled it myself. What angered the mother-in-law most of all was the fact that it was not her, but Wendy, who was respected in the village as a human being and a high-class professional. After all, it was her daughter-in-law who had become a certified animal technician, not her son William. It was only a few years that he held the position of club director, and then he burned out like a light bulb. The result of such a negligent attitude to work was the disintegration of the team, which he had worked so hard to assemble. Several times the man was summoned to the regional department, begging him to come to his senses. But William also spit on all entreaties from a bird's-eye view. When his wife asked him, "What are you going to do now? How are you going to make a living?" he answered for me with enthusiasm, "Don't worry, I won't become an idler. I'm gonna play at weddings. Believe me, there are so many clients that you can run, really." At first, the accordionist was in high demand. But then he was invited less and less often, and he was forced under pressure from his wife to get a job at the post office as a driver. A new director was never sent to the club. Therefore, a huge barn lock was hung on the door of the cultural establishment. Later, a businessman with a strange surname bought the ruined building. Michael was a visiting bird, and from the way he spoke, you could sense that he had a rich past. His appearance in the village caused quite a stir. He drove up in a shiny black car and stuck his head out the window. Asked him how's life here. Aborigin's unfamiliar word confused the old men who happened to witness Misha's appearance to the people of the Earls. Only one old man swung his cane at the businessman's car and shouted, "You, that word, go back to where you came from. We don't need pans and other nobles here. We have enough of our own." He laughed heartily and drove on, and the witnesses scattered in different directions to warn the neighbors about the arrival of a suspicious type in the village. Kelly was one of them. And Kelly was the first to tell, and bald men go everywhere. Finishing her eyes by habit, she stunned her friend from the threshold. "Oh, what's going on? Definitely soon will be the end of the world." Molly indifferently asked, "Well, and what happened there again?" "A real oligarch. He just came to us, said that he would live here. He's living on his own. What do we care about him?" "Ask," she said indignantly, as if this man had the appearance of a criminal and chains on him. Miranda showed her hands and the magnitude of the gold jewelry. However, it was on Kelly's wall, but her story made absolutely no impression. But when the same Miranda already on the second day said, "Remember, I told you yesterday about the oligarch. Well, he's already bought our club. He wants to open a store there. And he also has a grudge against the farm. He wants it to come there too." At half a word, Miranda froze, and then smiled radiantly. "By the way, he buys milk from private people, and his price is great, so keep it in mind." The bear thanked Miranda for the useful information, and on her tip went to establish contact with the new villager. Of course, the mother-in-law didn't think it necessary to warn her daughter-in-law, who was responsible for collecting milk from private people, about her decision. When Wendy learned of her husband's mother's latest antics, she became furious. She decided to tell her mother-in-law to her face all that she had boiled up in her soul. For many years of coexistence, Molly did not expect the arrival of the daughter-in-law, and at the first minute was confused. "Wendy 3 myself." From the threshold began Wendy, although she tried to be extremely polite. Her voice rang against Molly's wall. "I can't understand what you're trying to accomplish. Instead of helping me in any way, you're always giving me a hard time. What's there to help you with? You're so proud and independent." "Yes, I am. But your son needs care. He can't do anything, and I'm sick of babysitting him." My mother-in-law was triumphant. "Now you're singing. I remember when you used to keep William in the dark. If he'd married Adriana, he'd have had a different life. You'll tell me it's my fault you raised a lazy son. I'd have kicked him out the next day. Because a lazy brow like your son only gets in the way in the house." The women were arguing, and Lisa watched their faces, for such scenes happened very often before her eyes. She was used to them. William, too, was a bystander, as he put it, to the ladies' squabbles. He was careful to remain neutral. He enjoyed being the object of the two women's long-running argument. Winking at his daughter, he often said while Grandma and Mom are fighting, "My daughter will be like cheese and butter if they become friends. Then, daughter, your daddy's going to die." Since in the interests of the man was to heat up the hearth of the conflict, he asked his daughter to inform her mother on grandmother. The fault of the latter was that she all the milk from another village gives the oligarch. The girl was puzzled by such an assignment from her father. "Daddy, but it's not good to denounce relatives. Grandma might be offended by you. She doesn't know anything. And it's not snitching, it's a noble deed. Why don't you tell her yourself?" "I can't. You see what's going on here. We don't need to turn this conflict into a hot one. You're gonna tell your mom in confidence." Lisa did everything according to her father's instructions, but she didn't expect Wendy to react to the news. A storm of the most negative emotions. For probably an hour her mother scolded her grandmother with different words. She called her an adventurer and an old miasmatic. There sounded words and worse, but the girl realized that her grandmother should not pass them on. She decided not to tell Kelly anything at all. After that incident, relations between the daughter-in-law and mother-in-law spoiled definitively. In the fall, Molly stopped visiting them, but through her granddaughter she was aware of family events. One day William caught her grandmother in tears. "The girl is not on a joke," scared Grandma. "What's wrong with you? Are you sick?" Shouldn't you call a doctor? Molly waved her away. A doctor won't help. Wendy's right. I'm the last one. I got ditched by that alligator. The girl recoiled in fright. Have you seen a crocodile? Where Molly grinned sadly. He's taken up residence here. And that bald guy who bought the house by the store. That's him. So he's an oligarch. I don't care. They're both dangerous animals. Did that Aurelian really fight with you? The old woman began to lose patience with her granddaughter's endless questions. What makes you think he fought? But you yourself said that he threw you. My girl, that bad man screwed me for money. I gave him all the milk from another village for 3 months. I denied myself, and he didn't pay me a penny. He told me all about it later. And yesterday he said that my milk was of poor quality, and he scrapped it all. So he won't pay anything for such goods. Now I'm sitting like an old woman at a broken trough and don't know what to do. William grew up a sympathetic child, and I really wanted to help my grandmother. Grandma should tell the police. Let that bald guy go to jail. Let Kelly hold the girl close to her. What don't you realize? There's nothing you can do to get rid of that ghoul. And the precinct won't help. You do this. Tell the moms to come to me from the farm for milk. The girl told Wendy almost verbatim the whole conversation. The woman looked fondly at her daughter. Lisa, you're like a carrier pigeon. Tell your favorite Kelly that tomorrow they'll come to see her, and I'll put her on the list. We've warned everyone in the village not to trust such rascals. Wendy turned to her husband. You know, William, that man tried to take over our farm too, but he's had a setback. William was trying to fix an electric kettle. What's the trick? Wendy looked affectionately at her husband. You've got a short memory, like a girl on the run. I've already told you that our farm is a community farm. To sell it, we need the consent of all the shareholders. William thoughtfully fiddled with the teapot. I think you're celebrating your victory early. Men like Michael can break anyone. All you have to do is put a lot of money up against them. Rarely a man can resist. Time has proven both mother and father right. No matter how hard Michael tried, he failed to get hold of the farm, which was making a good profit. But one of the shareholders bought the business. The new owner began by tightening discipline at the farm, and at the same time cut the wages of the employees. The unpleasant changes took place just before Lisa arrived. Wendy experienced these changes hard and was in a bad mood. So William did not dare to talk to her about a subject that was very important to her. But since she was so excited and eager to tell someone about the upcoming changes in her personal life, she decided to share her secret with her grandmother. And going for salt was a convenient excuse to leave the house for a while. The girl's face reflected her overflowing emotions, because Molly immediately asked her, "Why did you come so early?" "My mom sent me to get salt. She rolls cucumbers, and there was no coarse salt at home." The old woman muttered unhappily that a good housewife should always have a supply of matches and salt in the house. Lisa spoke up in her mother's defense. "We have extra, and we haven't used matches for a long time because we have a special lighter. Not the territory. What are you doing standing on the doorstep? Come in. I'll put the kettle on. I can see from you that you haven't had breakfast yet." The girl took off her shoes and tiptoed into the big room. She knew that her grandmother liked cleanliness and order, so she tried not to disturb this harmony. "Come to the kitchen. We'll have breakfast here. There's no need to make a mess in the hall." Lisa obediently obeyed this order. The kitchen was already flooded with sunlight, which shone through the stylish curtains. Along the wall, Molly quickly set the table and put 2 cups of you hot or a little cooler. "Grandma, you know I don't like boiling water." People's tastes change. Maybe that's what changed in the city. How would I know? You don't come much anymore. The last remark was said with an obvious reproach, and Lisa felt her face light up. "Grandma, but you know that I don't have time right now, and I can't take off work every week. I mean, I'm new to this company, but that's what weekends are for, to visit family and relax. Something tells me you have another reason." The old woman looked at her granddaughter's face with a sharp look, and Lisa felt an unpleasant heat in her mouth. She first took her eyes aside and began to rub the chrome on the tablecloth. "Grandma, you can't hide anything from you. You're testing thoughts from a distance." Trying to hide her embarrassment, Lisa took a sip from the cup and immediately burned her tongue. Ouch! How hot the bum in her mouth would pop out now. Along the wall, Molly took a sip of normal as well. "Tea is like tea. You're not talking my teeth. Spill your secrets. I can see your eyes burning. You got love in town." William exhaled noisily. "Oh, Grandma, you're a real piece of work. You're a real mind reader. Okay, don't be embarrassed. Go ahead. And I promise I won't say a word to anyone." "Oh yeah, did Grandma ever lie to you?" Lisa touched her lips gently to the cup. "All right, I'll tell you first. Anyway, Grandma, I've got a young man. We work together. Actually, he's kind of my boss. He's so old." The girl laughed. "No, he's only 26. It's just that we have a lot of departments, and each one has its own manager. James was recently replaced by someone who moved to another company. Yeah, we only have 6 people in the department, so the supervisor isn't too big." Molly nodded. "As we had in the accounting department was the entire staff of 5 people, but necessarily attached to supervisor. Grandmother, now the supervisors are quite different. And they do the usual work. They just have more responsibility. And what's good about this James of yours?" Lisa blushed again. "He's honest and decent, well-mannered." The girl stammered about Kelly immediately taking the initiative. "And that was that." Lisa mumbled. "He's also cute. And chicks are chicks. You can't choose a husband by his good looks, can you? That's how they get married for joy. And a year later they run away to get divorced. Your grandfather was a handsome man too. But in life, he turned out to be a scoundrel." William begged Grandma, "Why are you going to extremes? Of course, I can't 100% say that James meets all the canons of a real man, but I'm easy and interesting with him. We had a lot in common and we've been dating for almost 6 months. Want to take a first guess? Have you had a chance to take your application to the registry office yet?" The granddaughter threw herself into her grandmother's arms. "You're like an X-ray, aren't you?" "Yes, we applied a week ago. And I came to tell you the good news. But it's not working out yet. My mom's not in the mood. She's been having some problems at work. I know, my farm girls told me. But it'll all work out sooner or later. And my daughter's wedding is a once-in-a-lifetime thing. So you can't keep a secret like that for long. Perhaps this news will cheer Wendy up." "Grandma, how great are you? It's just too bad you're not friends with Mom. Daddy and I love you both, but you're all at war with each other." The girl sympathized and began to kiss her grandmother. She gently pulled away from her. "Okay, enough sucking up. Take the salt. Run home. And your mother. Tell her not to put it off. She'll be offended." There was so much tenderness in the old woman's voice that William was stunned for a moment. But her grandmother gave her a push. "Run. Hurry up, Mother. You must be waiting for the salt." Perhaps the son transferred the excess energy to Lisa because she ran down the street in a sprint, scaring the chickens and ducks. After talking to Nana and her heart felt light, she wanted to sing songs and laugh. It was a moment of real happiness. And the girl remembered her soulmate. "I wonder what my James is doing at the moment. I should call him." She dialed her fiance's number several times, but he kept dropping her call. The sunny mood vanished at once, and Lisa wandered slowly back to her house. She gave her mother the salt, but the important conversation was postponed again. At the same time, James was in a meeting with his boss. Everyone's faces were tense because they were discussing important business matters. James also tried to get into the speech of the chief, but his thoughts were somewhere far away, not by the way in his jacket pocket cell phone. The young man tried to discreetly remove the cell phone from his pocket. It was Lisa. And the thought flashed through his mind that she had happened there. After all, She knows perfectly well that there is always a meeting at this time. He dropped the call and returned the cell phone to its original place, but the device twitched frantically in his pocket again. He had to reset the call again. Knowing the restless nature of his fiancée, James decided to write her a short message, but he could not do it discreetly. Wildly rotating his eyes, the supervisor stared at him. "Mr. James, I see that you absolutely do not care about the company's affairs, or in your division everything is on an A+. Caught off guard, the manager slowly stood up and stammered his excuses. "We also have shortcomings, but we try to correct them as they appear." The supervisor took a higher tone. "We should not wait for these problems to appear, but try to prevent them. I've already noticed that you, Mr. James, take your responsibilities lightly, and your department is in chaos." James tried to object, but the boss invited him to a seat with one look, "And don't try to say anything in your defense. All the faults of your work, so to speak, are there. Employees of your department are walking around the city during working hours without shame and conscience, and some of them you let go on unscheduled vacations." James guessed that someone had reported to the boss that he had given Lisa a week's vacation. Since it was useless to contradict the boss, he waited in silence for the rest of the rant, but the main one was limited to a couple of sentences. "It's a shame, James, that you haven't lived up to our trust. We put you in charge of the department to give you a chance to grow. What about you?" James already knew what the boss was going to say, and he almost shouted, "I'll make it up to you, I promise." Smiles appeared on the faces of the meeting participants, and some of them even laughed. The tension gave a crack, and the chief himself devoted faces. "I see that I am the only one who does not know what everyone here knows." Sitting, one of the deputy chiefs said, "Zach, do not swear. You guys are so strong. He's going through a special period." Someone loud enough with a laugh said, "Mating season." Everyone giggled, and even the boss showed his perfect smile. "But as long as it's the first time, we'll forgive it, but on the condition that we are invited to the wedding. If it's no secret, who's the bride?" The same connoisseur of bird leashes cheerfully answered the girl who joined us not so long ago. "You must remember her. She came to us from the institute with a red diploma." Chief rejoiced. "How well I remember her. Once she brought me reports. Although we have office romances are not welcome. But if everything is serious, we can only wish her happiness." On such a major note, the meeting ended, and James hurried to the exit. He wanted to hear the voice of his favorite girl, but no sooner had he dialed William's number than he was distracted again. James bitterly thought he would have to postpone the conversation until the evening, but his mother was waiting for him in the parking lot after work. "Nina," she looked at her son unhappily. "You're getting a little conceited. You've forgotten about your parents. I've been calling you all morning, but you've been throwing my calls away. Why don't you tell me what's going on?" James had an involuntary outburst. "So you're the one who's been calling me all morning, and I thought Lisa was trying to get to me." Nana gave her son a scornful look. "James, there's nothing wrong with you. Why such a pang of excitement? Have you been so badly influenced by this country girl?" Her mother's tone and the expression on her face spoke volumes about her attitude toward Lisa. She had disliked the girl from the first time she met her, and James imagined how shocked her mother would be when she heard about their imminent marriage. But he didn't want to discuss his marital status in a parking lot surrounded by strangers. He pushed his mother towards the car. "Nina, please, this is not the place for such delicate conversations." The woman went overboard. "Why are you pushing me into the car like I'm in a cage? My father is waiting for me outside the mall, and I want you to know that he's very unhappy with you and wants to talk to you. That's basically why I'm here." Since James blocked Nina's exit, she had to take the seat next to the driver. James slammed the door and got into the car as well. He calmly said, "Mom, what's with this stupid habit of yelling all over the street? By the way, I work here and my coworkers can hear your passages." The woman snapped back. "Let them hear you. Let them know who you're confusing with, Deja." "Mom, I'm asking you to watch your language. William doesn't deserve to be treated like this." "Nina," she screamed, Who the hell is she? You dug her up somewhere. Lisa works in my department. She graduated with a BA, by the way. What difference does that make? James couldn't help but smile. It's the kind of place where girls of all stripes flock to the city to pick up a richer man. James had an involuntary outburst. Mom, you're judging yourself, aren't you? If my memory serves me correctly, you're from the same provincial town. You came to this town about 30 years ago. Nina's eyes became unnaturally large. She turned pale and started gulping for air. James was scared out of his wits. He waved his handkerchief vigorously in front of the woman's face. Mammy, what's wrong with you? You can't take innocent jokes so keenly. The pale on her face was replaced by paint, and the mother pronounced clearly in syllables, "Don't you dare. Don't you dare ever speak to me in such a swaggering tone again. And don't compare me to that girl. Daddy and I had true love. It's the kind of love you write about in novels. And your Lisa's got a look on her face that says she's got a low-down agenda." James could barely contain his irritation. Every day is a new discovery. I didn't realize you were a face. You know, Mom, I'm not a little boy to be told how to live my life anymore. And I really hope you and Dad learn to respect my decisions. Nina threw her son another scornful look. Respect must be earned, not demanded. The woman tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge, and she shouted to James, "Let me out now." He silently got out of the car and walked around to the front. The door slid open smoothly, and Nina climbed out. James waited for his mother to gain a stable position and slowly pulled out of the parking lot. There was still hope in his soul that she would turn around and wave. Nina had a peculiar way of gesticulating. What do all professionals who work with hearing-impaired people do? James learned this sign language as a child and was very proud of this skill. His parents were always role models for him. But today, to his great regret, he realized that their kindness was played up, and sympathy for others was just a set of appropriate words. If also father was quite reserved, never boasted of his high status. Mother always tried to emphasize her belonging to the elite. James remembered the night he had decided to introduce Lisa to his parents without a second thought. Even 2 months after the event, he now felt a burning shame. Lisa became a part of his life very quietly. She did not whirlwind, as they write in books, and did not appear with a halo on her head in a cloud of a night dream. No, everything was banal beyond belief. James had just started his duties as head of the department and was trying to get used to the new place. He received a call from the receptionist at the main office in the morning. "James, to you literally from a minute to a minute should come a new employee to see her in the course of business. Get acquainted with the team, and please, gently with her. The girl is very shy." James promised that everything will be at the highest level. No sooner had he hung up the phone than a timid knock sounded. He quickly assumed a superior appearance. Enter the small office, squeezed sideways, a person of about 30 years old in a very modest outfit. "Remember your promise." A young man jumped out from behind the desk and began to park himself in front of the female visitor. "Don't be shy. Come in and make yourself at home. We have a great team, and I am sure that you will make the best friends here." He said a dozen more phrases, not letting the visitor open her mouth. Then he gently took the woman under his elbow and led her to the door. "And now, I'll show you your workplace. We have the most modern computers and a reliable data protection system." All the employees of the department watched this scene with interest, when suddenly the aunt released her hand and asked very loudly, "Why do I need your computers? I can't even touch them. When I worked in another company, they were also full of such machines. I was warned not to go within 2 meters of them." There was a much talked about silence. The aunt was the first to break the pause. She looked pleadingly at James. "You'd better show me. Where are your toilets under the sotka?" "I'll get right to work." Only after the woman asked about the toilets, James realized that she was getting a job as a janitor. The members of the department were holding their bellies, and he didn't know where to go out of embarrassment. It was the first time he had ever been in such a ridiculous situation, And for a few minutes his anger boiled up in him. He even wanted to call the chief's secretary and tell her what he thought. But he had to finish the job with the new cleaning lady first. He showed the woman to the back rooms and returned to his office. No sooner had James sat down at his desk than there was another knock on the door. A girl resembling a schoolgirl appeared on the threshold. She politely ducked for some reason. "Hello, I'm here to see you at work." His brain boiled with indignation, and he thought another prank. Isn't that a lot for one day? The visitor continued to smile, and he too stretched his lips and said with a sneer, "For today, the limit of cleaners is exhausted. Come back when a spot becomes available." The girl looked at him with bewilderment. "Didn't you get a call?" He chuckled stupidly, but he had been called. "Well, I'm here." James felt an incredible excitement and was carried away. "Very good. I'm going to show you where the restroom is. And then I'll take you to the pantry where we keep the buckets and rags." He appeared before the girl, and she looked at him with astonished eyes. Then, in a suddenly firm voice, she asked, "Are you all right?" This question had the effect of a ringing slap, and James instantly regained his psychological equilibrium. "Why do I look so much like a freak?" The girl answered very calmly. "Your eyes are running like a crazy person. And in general, you're talking such nonsense." "Thank you. You brought me to my senses." Thinking back on that encounter, James was struck by how calm William was. She didn't frighten or cry with surprising equanimity. She waited for the denouement. At first, their relationship violence is purely official in nature. Only 2 months later, they found themselves in the same cafe during a lunch break. James managed to be the first to take a table and was enjoying his coffee when he noticed William. The girl was looking for an empty seat, and he waved to her. "William, you can land next to me." She thanked him politely. And he too, for the sake of decorum, asked, "Do you want me to wait? How would you like it?" 2 days later, he invited her to a cafe, and she accepted his invitation. This period was short-lived and was replaced by short walks after work. And then James invited her to a concert of a popular band. After the amazing event, they walked around the city until night and shared their impressions. James himself felt the need to move on to the next stage of the relationship. During their lunch break, which they traditionally spent in a cafe, he asked William, "How do you feel about dating?" She gave him a charming smile. "Positive. I think there is something mysterious in such meetings, besides romance, and I love anything with a spirit of secrecy. Yes, you should have studied economics, writing, or screenwriting." "Well, one doesn't preclude the other. I get my passion for everything from my father. He's like my mom says, not of this world. He's a creative man who likes to fantasize. You intrigue me, and I'd like to meet your father. I like unconventional people." "What do your parents do?" "My mom's a speech pathologist. She helps children and adults with speech problems. My father has recently been appointed rector of a very prestigious institute." The girl looked at James with respect. "You? And I have parents from simple peasants. My mother worked on the farm all her life, and my father delivered mail." James never paid much attention to the social status of his friends and acquaintances, so the information about Lisa's parents had slipped past his mind. He remembered it only when he decided to invite her to visit him. Of course, he had talked to her parents beforehand. Before the weekend, he showed up at their house late at night. The door was opened by his father. "Mother, our son showed up. Go meet him." Nina ran out into the hallway. She was wearing a robe, and all her face except her eyes was covered with a green mass. "James, you were unannounced as usual and caught your mom looking so inappropriate." "It's okay, Mom. I'm used to it, and it's beautiful. That's the most important thing to any woman. I'm glad you understand. Your father's been so unbearable lately, nagging me all the time." David smirked. "It's just boredom. We've been together for so many years that we're bored with each other." The man paused, winking slyly at his son. "I wish you'd gotten married. Otherwise, my mother and I will never have grandchildren." James also winked at his father. Perhaps your wish will soon come true. I think I've met the girl I wish to always have by my parents' side. How would you like to meet her?" David was genuinely excited. It was felt both by his lively conversation and his mood. But Nina was wary of the news and spent the whole evening asking her son and his girlfriend. There was an important visit the following weekend, and James immediately realized that William did not like his mother. The guest also sensed the hostess's dislike, and the whole evening was very stilted. When it was time to serve tea, Nana called her son James. "Help me, I can't do it alone." The young man went into the kitchen and immediately came under fire of criticism. Nina whispered so loudly that he shut the door tighter. "My son, who have you brought into our house? Are you really going to tie your life to this wire?" "Mom, we haven't decided anything yet. We're just dating. But I'm not gonna lie to you. I like Lisa a lot. She's an extraordinary girl. They're all extraordinary at first, and then they become bitches and divide the property." "Mom, why do you have to tar a man with tar?" "I'm just trying to open your eyes, son. Take a closer look at your Lisa. Think about it. If you still value our opinion, I can tell you that this girl is no match for you." James didn't want to spoil the mood, and after a boring tea party, he left his parents' house with Lisa. The girl was sad and silent the whole way, only in front of the hostel where she was temporarily staying. She said wistfully to James, "You should have organized this meeting for nothing. Your parents didn't like me. I don't know about your father. Your mom is definitely turning against me. Don't fill your head with bad thoughts. My mother is a difficult person. Just ignore her." Soon they applied to the registry office, but they did not inform their parents about this step. For a long time in James's head, obsessive thoughts were spinning the word combination of unequal marriage thrown by his mother. But after the last conversation with his mother, he realized that it was time to draw the line and notify his parents of his decision. His father called the next day. "James, we need to meet and talk. Mom was really mad last night, and I want to know what you said to her." James had been waiting for this call and had time to prepare for it mentally. He calmly replied, "It's more like she told me, and a whole cartload more." There was metal in David's voice. "Son, but you know that your mother is worried about you. You're the only one we have. That's why we're so worried." "Dad, you and Mom are missing one important detail. I'm 26 years old. Okay, let's really talk about this when we meet." "Okay, I'll meet you at 6 o'clock in the city park. Our spot." As a child, James often spent time with his father in the recreation park. It was a favorite spot for the townspeople, and it was always crowded on weekends. David was an avid hunter and loved to demonstrate his marksmanship at the shooting range. He also patiently taught his son how to hit a 10-pointer. These memories put on sad thoughts. But why do all the best things happen in childhood? But it is only when a person grows up, as this notorious gap of misunderstanding between the closest people arises. With this question, he turned to his father. We waited for him near the shooting range. David was surprised. "You decided to start with the main thing right away. Well done." And I spent the whole day thinking how to get to a delicate subject. "Dad, it seems to me that our conversation has no sense at all, because Lisa and I have already decided everything." The elder James furrowed his brow. "You mean like decided?" "Yeah, we're usually adults and haven't needed parental guidance for a long time. Anyway, we've already applied, and in 3 months you'll sign." David plunged into thought. James waited patiently, and he really wanted to draw a line at this stage of his life. He understood that his parents sincerely wished him happiness, but they had a very different understanding of happiness. As if reading his thoughts, his father said, "Of course, your mother, and I didn't think this would happen." "That's right, Dad, but can you script out even one single life? I don't think these things are negotiable, because only 2 people should decide their own destiny. And Lisa and I have already made our choice. Do you like it or not?" David patted his son on the shoulder. "Come on, don't get emotional. I promised to talk to my mother today." They talked some more about small things and said goodbye. The next day, Nina showed up at the office. She strode down the hall with a confident gait, and admiring glances followed her. When James saw his mother, he was numb with surprise. Nina was pleased with the effect. "James, Dad, and I had a talk yesterday, and here I am. Take me to your Lisa. I'd really like to talk to her for a while." James looked suspiciously at his mother, but she reassured him. "Don't worry. I won't say anything unnecessary. It's just a matter of getting on with things." He showed his mother where Lisa worked and left the women alone. Nina came back again half an hour later. She is a nice girl and smart. James was very worried, although he tried to hide it. His mother touched his arm affectionately. "James, I'm not your enemy. Don't worry. We just talked a little, and I even liked the girl. By the way, I invited her parents to visit. I think that's the right thing to do, because we need to think together about where to have your wedding. Mom, Lisa and I wanted to keep it quiet. It doesn't matter what you wanted. Our opinions matter too. You know your fiancé's father is a great accordion player. He plays at his weddings over there." "Yes, Lisa told me." Nina looked lovingly at her son again and sighed. "Maybe you two can work something out." "Well, I'll leave you to it. I suggest you go to the village yourself." James was surprised. "Why would I go there? What kind of stupid question is that? Will you bring your relatives in your car?" "Mom, William's parents have their own car, and even her mother drives the car well." This news startled the woman, and she puckered her lips at his obnoxious smirk. James had unmistakably guessed her mood. "Mother, did you really think the countryside was home to beggars and wretches who ate cucumbers and potatoes and slept in haylofts? I think it's time for you to visit your relatives. Don't you feel drawn back to your native land?" "No, I don't. I'll tell you more. My childhood memories are not exactly pleasant, but I don't want you to know my little secrets. Let things remain as they are." She looked at him again with that unique look that only a mother can give. William had confessed to her mother just before she left that she was getting married. She had chosen a very unfortunate moment to do so, for Wendy was again busy with riddles. She couldn't hold the jar, and it fell to the floor. Brine splashed across the surface of the active foot of the hostess. "Daughter, it's a joke." Lisa grabbed a rag. "Mom, why are you like this? How should I behave? Tell me, how should I behave after what you said? You're not ready for married life." William has also joined the emergency response. "Wendy, think of yourself. You didn't prepare for marriage from the cradle, and you've survived and learned everything. And so will our daughter. She's a smart girl." Wendy was silent for a moment to gather her thoughts, then threw a light shawl over her shoulders. "I'm going to my grandmother's to talk to her." William was surprised, but decided it was better to keep silent. When his wife came out, he winked at his daughter. "Well, gentlemen of the jury, I think the ice is breaking. Maybe my lovely women will come to an amicable settlement." The man was right. In the fall, for the first time in 22 long years, she greeted her daughter-in-law cordially by a different kind of Wendy. She guessed she already knew everything. Passable, good. Don't worry about it. That's how everybody gets married. You and I need to think about what we're getting for the wedding. Wendy exhaled. "Oh, Molly, believe me, I'm not thinking about presents right now. I'm thinking about how she'll be alone without us there. Yeah, she'll be fine. She went to college, and nothing's missing from her husband's life. If this James is as she described him, you don't have to be so dismissive about the gift. I've already got an idea." The mother-in-law summarized her idea, and the daughter-in-law was shocked again. "Do you think it will work?" I said sure it would. I've already found out everything and even found a good lawyer. But that's how much money we'll have to throw away. The old woman waved her hand carelessly. "Why should I take these papers with me to the next world? At least it would be good for her only granddaughter." Lisa knew nothing about the negotiations between the relatives. After a week's vacation, she came back to the city, and on the first day, she was visited by her future mother-in-law, Nina. She was not the same as when she visited, and Lisa even liked her. The girl was even more pleased when James, and that his parents were expecting her relatives. Lisa, you probably know that in the olden days there was such a tradition. The girl interrupted the young man. If you are referring to the courtship, then in the villages this custom is still observed. Only the groom's relatives come to the bride. We're gonna do the opposite. I don't mind being the object of everyone's attention for one evening. The joke turned out well, and they laughed at it together in a merry excitement. The future newlyweds imagined how the party would go, but they did not expect the turn the event would actually take. The whole Medvedev family at the appointed time appeared by car to the house where the professor's couple lived. James's parents tried to show their cordiality and hospitality. David succeeded quite well. Nina's smile and words lacked sincerity. William whispered to his wife, "If we were to evaluate according to Stanislavski, I would now loudly say I do not believe." The man did not calculate the possibilities of his voice. And this phrase really sounded loud. The smile fell off Nina's face. "Did you say something?" "I'm sorry, I didn't hear you." William quickly realized what to say. "Yes, I wanted to say that I don't believe those who say that life is so much better in the city. We've only been here a few hours and already we're dizzy from the noise. And your air isn't as clean as ours in the country. You probably can't find any food in the store that isn't full of crap." The James spouses looked at each other uncomprehendingly. Nina indignantly said, "I, too, lived in a small town, and my grandmother even kept a cow at the wall." Molly cheerfully picked up on that. "And I still do to this day. The cow feeds us and allows for some luxuries." The mask of decency instantly flew off the face of the hostess. "What are you talking about? What luxuries in the countryside? There are no proper stores there. I'm not even talking about a beauty parlor or a hairdresser's. Of course, I realize that every waiter has to praise his swamp, but you don't even have a normal wedding." The guests were silent and averted their eyes. Only on the wall Molly fixed her gaze on the groom's mother. "Why are you so bad about the village? You think you were bitten to death by mosquitoes there. Believe me, we're no slouch over there, either. And we have our holidays the way they should be celebrated. Tell me, what are you going to give your children for the wedding?" James and I exchanged glances again. This time it was the professor himself who answered. "We decided to give them a fairy tale. That is, an unforgettable trip to the end of the world," and Nina's lips curled. "You probably haven't heard of such a place as the Maldives." Molly accepted the challenge. "You don't think we're that stupid? Have we heard of these islands? Have we seen it on TV? But I do not understand. Why should they go there if we can relax on the river? It's just a waste of money. My daughter-in-law and my son, and I decided to give them a company." Kelly expected anything but silence. The would-be matchmakers looked at her, trying to contain their laughter. Not Nina. She couldn't hold it in first and laughed at bay. "Grandma, what firm? Where did you get that kind of money?" Kelly threw aside conventionality. "You're not laughing. I'm not kidding, am I? I'm actually buying a firm that's bankrupt. I've got the accounts, I've got everything. Just in time for the wedding. Let the kids do what they want, and I'll be an investor for a while. That is, I'll invest the rest of the money in them." There was silence at the table again. Only Nanda's smile disappeared from her face. "I don't get it, even if it's not a joke." "As you say, bursting into tears." Molly smirked. "What's the fancy word for it? Come on, granddaughter, help me out." When all sorts of tests are conducted, Lisa as frightenedly prompted a quest exactly the same. "Let's see how our newlyweds, whom we have taught for so many years, will pass this quest." "Well, and we will always help advice." Nina looked at her husband confused. Everything had not gone according to the plan she had made. After the words about the Maldives, the newly married relatives had to get embarrassed, to start thinking about what it was. And when would they realize that they weren't in the clear? Now the Ridolf woman clearly felt as if they were the ones who were out of place. William looked at the satisfied grandmother and mother with equal surprise. James, too, flapped his eyes in silence. but his mind was already full of grandiose plans. He was confident in both his own abilities and those of his future wife. William was the most confused of all. He did not understand at all what the conversation was about. Besides, he was terribly offended that he had not been consulted. All right, Wendy, he was used to her not thinking of him as a human being. But Mom, how could she sleep with his wife? In general, William was even scared. Of course, he always said that he suffered from the fact that Molly and Wendy do not get along. But now, if they become good at communicating, it is likely to be so. His William's quiet life would come to an end. David, the rolling lasted, and everyone turned to him as if he was the only one who could say the right thing right now. I'm thinking, Nina, as we're still in the middle of buying a trip, maybe it's more rational to just give the kids the money. Let them invest it in their own business. Something tells me that with a grandmother like that, all doors will be open to them, and everything will work out. Nina, she looked at her husband as if he were a traitor, then silently got up from the table and left. James followed her about 10 minutes later. At her, Nana refused to come out, told him to pass on her apologies because she suddenly had a terrible migraine. Wendy got up. We should get going too. David got up from the table. Where are you going? It's almost night, and you still have miles to go. Wendy smiled. She caught it, and when she woke up, she answered him. But we are not on the edge of the world, and we live only a couple of hours, and we are already home. Besides, you forget that we are not city dwellers, and we have a household at home. David looked at the future wedding party with surprise. Oh, she knows how to discreetly send to the defendant too. But see for yourself. By the way, we never really talked about the wedding. William was in the hallway reprimanding his father because he's inconspicuous, and it's not clear how he got his hands on it. James helped support him. Wendy looked at her host with a smile. Well, now it's your turn to come to us, and make sure you stay overnight. You need to see how clean the air is in the evening in our area. David now realized that William, that her mother, they didn't open up right away. She seemed like an ordinary, modest woman from the countryside. But it's a pleasure to talk to her. She pronounced the words correctly, and there was no hint of any rustic intonation. He suddenly became terribly curious to see how the future matchmakers lived. He remembered, of course, that today they had the task of embarrassing Lisa's parents and upsetting the wedding. But now he realized that there would be a wedding, even if they forbade it on pain of death. As the guests left the room, Nina came out. What are we going to do? David at first wanted to answer with harshness, but then he thought that as his wife he was also going to do everything to upset this wedding. So he went up to his wife, hugged her, and you and I will be going to visit our future in-laws. Because of your migraine, we never got to discuss the wedding. But David, that's it, Nina. Let's just get over it. Try to accept the situation. By the way, the more I talk to Lisa, the more I like her. You know, she's got some kind of inner chord, you know. She looks like a dandelion girl, a shepherdess. Dig a little further. No, you should definitely just get to know her better. And then all our assumptions, as you can see, didn't pan out. I don't think Lisa is at all interested in our untold riches either. The last words were said in such a pompously theatrical tone that Nina couldn't stand it and threw the wrong career David. James tried not to get in front of his parents. First of all, he was still a little shocked by Lisa's gift from the family. And secondly, he knew how hard it was to lose, or rather, to accept losing. And his mom had definitely lost. He'd just wait until things settled down. Tonight, he and Lisa were to meet the firm that Lisa's grandmother had mentioned. Of course, its sale was not a quick matter, but the owner, who was very anxious to get rid of it, had kindly offered them a familiarization tour. The feeling was very unusual. They go together to see their future business. The mother called 4 days later. "Hello, son," James cautiously answered, not expecting anything good. "Hello, Mom. Why did you disappear?" "No, I haven't disappeared. A lot of work, and the firm was getting acquainted." He almost bit his tongue off. But why does he tell his mother that? She wouldn't be happy for him anyway. James was sure of it. Well, you tell your father, you know, I'm not good at financial matters. Dad's the head here, and I'm more of a spendthrift. That's not what I'm talking about. We didn't agree on the wedding. Well, if you be so kind as to call. Let her find out when it's convenient for us to come. But I can't just say I accept your faith. But I'll try. James hung up the phone, wanted to dial Lisa's number. Then he waved goodbye and went to her. When he told her about his mother's call, he grinned suddenly. You know, it's so unusual for Lisa to feel that her mother won't be giving us a hard time anymore. William smiled. Well, she's understandable. You're her only son. It's understandable that she'd hate to let you go. James looked at his fiancée with admiration. You know, you're amazing. I mean, you know perfectly well that your mom was against you, and now you're defending her. Lisa shrugged. It's enough to put yourself in her shoes. What do you think? My mom cried tears of delight when I informed her I was getting married. They laughed. God, what kind of punishment am I in for? William, why are you lying down? It's going to get mossy. William pretended to be sound asleep, and you give him a kernel on the forehead or a bucket of cold water. The man opened his eyes abruptly. Somehow he had missed the moment when his mother came to them. He must have dozed off. Well, since Molly's here in the fall, there's no resting. This Wendy was all more words, and his mother had never been shy about means to an end. He sat down on the bed. What are you clucking like chickens? I have to build a terrace so that you can gather there and not disturb my rest. There's no family time. And by the way, I went to bed after 2 o'clock. Wendy turned to him immediately. What do you think? If I hide the TV from you at night, will you go to bed on time? William ate and got along. What can she do? She'll just hide it. Women are out of control. He looked at his mother, then at Wendy. They both looked at him with the same expression. William thought to himself, this is it. The worst that could ever come has arrived. They laughed. So my song is over. But no, we'll fight on. What's this early morning meeting? Wendy put her hands to her sides before she started to tell him off. When you were watching your soccer game last night, did you notice anything else? William stared at her uncomprehendingly. I was watching soccer, but I was hiding beer under the chair. What's soccer without beer? What could have happened last night? A star fell from the sky, and I'm gonna fall on you, and you're gonna have a star burning between your eyes on the wall. Molly nodded her head in agreement, and I might add, William was starting to freak out. Why can't you two, like crazy people, say something normal? Wendy even pushed with her foot. I told you yesterday I came up to you twice, and you didn't even notice me. William wrinkled his forehead. That was exactly right. He only remembered that he thought she was trying to take the beer away from him, so he pretended that such a tense moment in soccer. William, James's parents are coming over this weekend, and he's, you know. William rubbed his hands together. He really liked the holidays. First of all, it's fun. Second of all the good stuff Wendy cooks that you can eat for a week. You can eat for a week. Third, of course, there'd be the booze he'd always been forbidden. And fourthly, when there are guests, when there's no one bothering him, he can legally do nothing. That is, he and so, of course, especially will not break a leg, but in the holiday it can be done quite officially. But as it turned out, Molly is not the only one who has an expert on nutritional thoughts. Wendy immediately said, if you think that you will lie quietly on the couch to wait for guests, you are deeply mistaken. Now you have breakfast, and you're going to finally finish the terrace, and then clean up the yard. You're going to make the place look nice. William even laughed. Well, you've got a terrace to build and build. What can I do there in 3 days? Molly intervened. Don't worry, son, I'll help you. Where with a word, and where with a stick along the spine. William stopped smiling. You can't be serious, can you? Wendy nodded. I couldn't be more serious. You have exactly 2 hours to tell me what you're missing. I'll go and get some, and I have to go to work. William looked from one to the other and realized they weren't joking at all. In fact, to be honest, he wasn't going to finish this terrace this year. It's a long time coming. You have to think about it. You have to think about it. You have to take your time. Now what? William began to dress in silence. He was thinking hard about what he could think of to say that it was impossible. But then his mother said something that made him drop his shirt. "Oh, Wendy, I don't know what you see in him. Skinny and not much of a man. Lazy as I don't know what. Well, that's all right. We'll have to re-educate him. Better late than never." William now clearly realized that he had no choice. In the past, you could run from Wendy to your mother, complain, to hear that it was the pebbles that drove him to the end. Now there was no one to complain to, nowhere to hide. Nana paced nervously around the apartment. "David, but why do we have to stay overnight? There are obviously no facilities there. And in general, Nina did not inflame before time. First of all, they didn't look ancient to me, so I wouldn't say it's bad. Secondly, he hesitated, and his wife looked at him in surprise. You see, Nina, all work is running around. If he rests, then Maldives, because the position obliges. Just recently I realized that I would sit on the beach with a fishing rod and even beat mosquitoes with pleasure." Nina involuntarily smiled, imagining this picture. "Well, it would probably be much better without mosquitoes. David, only let you promise me that if there's a cabin there, we'll go back home in the evening." "Okay, David trumps." "Yes, my general." And Nina sighed. They'd been married for so many years. In public, they're always serious and collected. But at home, when not seen, even their son David could fool around. And then, as if in an instant, the years passed away. And it became so easy, so joyful. And then a little sad, because you begin to realize that a lot of things will never happen again. Let's think again about what we should take with us. David looked at the 2 huge bags that stood in the middle of the room. "I didn't realize how long we're going for." "Not Nina. Are you inoculated?" "What is it?" "Nothing extra blankets, bed medicine, warm clothes, light clothing." She would have gone on and on with the list, but David put his hands up. "Stop. That's not how it works. Imagine if someone came to visit you with all that stuff. You'd probably be offended. So what do you suggest? We'll travel light." "Sure. Well, we'll stop by, get something. A delicatessen cake." Nina sighed, then just stepped over the bags. "But then let's go. I'll sort it all out later." David looked at his wife carefully. Nina was just obsessed with cleanliness and order, and to leave the bags in the middle of the apartment and drive away. Apparently she was in 2 shot feelings. He put his arm around her. "Well, look at me." Nina obediently looked up. "Do you want our son to be happy?" She nodded. "But I'm not preventing him from that. Just help." James picked them up when they were already out in the yard. "Oh, I'm surprised I don't have to force you into the car." David helped his wife into the car, then sat down himself and didn't drive. "I don't trust you." James immediately took offense. "Then you should have driven your own car." "I trust you." David, embarrassed by the purse. "Well, no offense, I said it without thinking. My mother and I are a little nervous." James sighed. "I'm nervous too. The first meeting didn't go well. But we'll see how the second one goes." James had a cell phone. It was on a stand that rested on a panel. Lisa was calling, and it was a video call. He had no choice but to take the call. David immediately turned the phone towards him. "Hello, William." "James, you drive. You talk. He can hear you." William was confused. Then she looked at her future father-in-law. "Daddy wants to know how to make a sauna. Do you like to steam?" David felt a twinge in his cheekbones. He had only been in a bathhouse a couple of times and had never been able to do it again. He smiled. "Girls, I don't know if I'm in love or not, but I'm willing to try anything." William laughed, nodded her head, and said goodbye. Nana said, "David, be careful what you wish for. You're not a boy anymore." David replied, "Everything will be all right. You'll see." In an hour or an hour and a half, James' passengers fell asleep on the road. He said, "Well, if the navigator is right, we are almost there." David rubbed his eyes and looked around. They were driving through a fairly large and also very modern village. There's nothing to it. What was his mother so afraid of? James looked tensely at the houses and finally smiled. "There's William's house, waiting for us, Nina," and scrutinizing the house. "Yeah, it might even be a good place to sleep. Who knows? Maybe there's even water in the house." There was water and a toilet in the house. Of course, I didn't immediately praise William, and he was modestly silent that as soon as it was time to deal with the sewage, he immediately switched to some illnesses as serious as migraine and colic. Wendy had to hire laborers. That's how they built the whole place. The guests don't need to know that at all. And here we have the terrace. Have a seat. Now we'll have tea before the bath, and after the bath we'll sit down. William carefully hid behind his back, interrupting his fingers. Oh, how much I wanted to tell him how he was working like a mother, even if she wouldn't let him take a break for a while. But intercepting a glance in the wall, Molly only sighed. Nina was staring at the chair, around which Wendy and William were snooping. And this is called just having tea. In her mind, tea is a mug, tea and candy. And here it was all so unhealthy, but so appetizing. She silently watched as her husband, a respectable man who even at home ate only with the proper food utensils, with some sort of gleeful pleasure scooped a large bright wooden spoonful of sour cream, which for some reason did not run off the spoon, did not drip, but just stood lump on it and sent it into her mouth. David even squeezed his eyes shut with pleasure, and then, without opening his eyes, he said to Nina, "Do you think that what we eat, sour cream, it's nothing like that. Sour cream turns out to be completely different." Molly smiled approvingly that the future relative didn't seem to be as bad as she had first thought. She moved a plate of cottage cheese over to him. David aimed and scooped up an equally large mound. James and Lisa watched him with a smile. They Nina. Jana frantically tried to calculate how many calories were in it all. Then it was time to try her own smoked meat, then Grandma Kelly's pies. After 10 minutes, Nina gave up. Everyone at the table was eating with such gusto that it was impossible to resist. She felt like she couldn't even move. Wendy invited her into the house. "Come on, Nina, I'll show you where you'll sleep. In fact, let the men rest without us." Molly went to the veranda to rest, and Lisa, Nina, and Wendy headed into the house. Nay found behind the lady of the house and realized that, strangely enough, she did not annoy her. Not forever, explained obese women. Even if they were only 2 pounds overweight, Wendy was well over 2 pounds. She wasn't fat, more like pudgy. Wendy's movements were swift. The house, as Nina had time to notice, was perfectly clean, which was very important to her. And she also realized that to imagine Wendy thin simply could not. "This is your room, and James's." "I style on the veranda." Nina raised her eyebrows in surprise. "A whole room?" "Well, of course, I don't want you to feel. You can rest if you want. It'll take a couple more hours." Nina did not rest, or rather, didn't let her husband David. He came into her room. "Nina, let's go for a walk to see the people. We'll go to the river." She wanted to refuse, but she saw such a plea in her husband's eyes that she just sighed. They hadn't gone 100 meters when an old man appeared in front of them, as if from under the ground. "Good health." Nana regarded him with amazement. He was a complete image of the old men from the fairy tales. David had a particularly happy smile. "Hello." Going further was out of the question. The old man was standing in such a way that he would have to be defiantly bypassed, and since he was not going to retreat, it's not all said. That means you have to be polite. "I can't admit it. Whose will you be?" "We, grandfather, are nobodies. We came to visit who?" The situation was getting ridiculous, but it was clear that it was better to answer, because this grandfather will not just leave. Were Wendy and William more important than matchmakers? Well, you could say that. The old man thought for a while. Yeah, you're lucky to have Wendy. She's a respected person. I suppose you could say indispensable. If anything happens, everyone goes to her. And they know that if anyone can save a tunny, it's Wendy. Her mother-in-law is a real bitch. But what's there to say about her? Molly is Molly. The old man disappeared as suddenly as he'd appeared. Nina even helped with her eyes. And then she asked, "What was that?" David, rubbing his hands together happily, answered it was Nina. Local color. Let's hurry up and see the river ahead. He grabbed his arm and almost sideways dragged him towards the river. Nina praised herself for her foresight. She had time to change into high-heeled shoes and simple slippers and rushed after her husband. Again, she remembered those years when she and Dima had just met. He would grab her by the hand and drag her somewhere where, in his opinion, she should be very interesting. When Nina was distracted by the beauty of the river for a moment, her husband disappeared. She looked back and saw him having a serious conversation with a boy of about 7 who was sitting with a fishing rod. Then David stood up, shook his hand, and returned to her. Nina remained silent. She knew for sure that he wouldn't stand for it, and for sure he would. Not 5 minutes later, David was talking fast. "You won't believe it, but the children in the village are so mature. Will be waiting for me tomorrow at 6:00 a.m. and will even bring me a fishing rod. No way. Look, David, we're not playing too hard to get. David, be serious. You know, the more I'm here, the more I realize we're playing in the city. Here in this place, you can just be yourself." Nina sighed. Her husband was right about something. She understood that, but she didn't want to accept it. Nina had spent so long building it all up. Their whole world or a fiction. Was the bath a huge shock for Nina? No, of course. She'd been to saunas and all the fancy bathhouses. They were sitting on the terrace. And William, who had already taken on chest, waving his fingers with pathos, said, "No, you just look around, what beauty, what latitude." Wendy smiled affectionately at him. "Father, you'd better get an accordion instead of ranting. Play us something for our souls." He looked at his hands doubtfully, but then waved his hand. A real master of his craft, a hammered finger is no obstacle at all. Nina sat pressed against her husband, and David even covered his eyes to listen to the melody. As bad as William's economic acumen was, he was certainly a musician of God. When the melody subsided, Nina suddenly said, "You know, I owe you an apology for both my behavior and my thoughts not being as good as I am right now. It's been a long time since you've had one. There's such a calmness here, as if it were the only right place in the world. I confess I thought the girl from the village was no match for my son at all. But now I think we're very lucky for him too." Wendy smiled, and Molly said, "Don't worry, Nina. I came here about 50 years ago, and I couldn't get over the fact that it's nice here, and the people are nice. I called the whole village a fancy word then. So now I wear that word as a nickname. All my life, David stood up, and I had a great idea." William immediately grabbed the bottle, for the idea needs a drink. Wendy gave him a stern look, and William immediately snickered. "Wendy, what are you doing?" "It's for the idea." William laughed after her. "James, it's like they've been forgotten about." They were watching their parents with pleasure from their corner. Their laughter was picked up by their grandmother, and then by everyone. And David continued, "So we're all here today because of the children. But there is such an atmosphere here that you don't want to think about anything serious. And here's my idea. But please note, it's just an idea. If the young people don't like it, we'll forget about it." He was silent for a moment, as if choosing words. "Pretty soon our children will be a family, thanks to their grandmother. But they'll have plenty for their parents to do, too, of course. So we won't see them very often. And if we can catch them in the city," Wendy sighed sadly. She had been thinking about it for days, and the future matchmaker went on. "And I think, let's at least have a wedding in the village. Here, such vastness, we will all bring Toastmaster waiters. You can't imagine how great it would be. Nina wanted to be indignant, but how could you even think of such a thing? And the guests, and the outfits, and the beauty parlors. How could her husband even imagine all this? But for some reason, the words wouldn't come. I was thinking of some kind of dashing, beautiful rustic fun, and it had to be outdoors. David eyed his wife warily, but she kept silent. Then he turned to Lisa and James. What do you say? James was also excited by the idea that we could have a party here that no one in the village had ever seen. Lisa looked at him in surprise. Wow, didn't you say you didn't want all those boring ceremonies? This is boring, and this is here. Zach hugged David. You don't understand. This is not a vacation. This is a super vacation. And what a family this is. It's amazing. And they both work for me. James said he's quitting. But I don't take offense. I understand that young people need to develop. James Lyra's boss had been drinking a lot, and now the whole world was trying to put him in the car that came for him. But it wasn't so easy. That's for a drink. That toast is good. That hug not everyone. But in the end, after the last passage, he had to be carried to the car. Colleagues David respected and serious people were not in the best condition. They all said the air here was special. It's like nowhere else. Such a wedding the village really has not seen for many years, and maybe never heard of at all. All the neighbors were there, everyone who had any contact with the Madrid family. How many more from the city? Only a year after the event, James and Lisa were already ahead of the curve with their first orders, and David recommended her to his friends. They didn't have kids around much anymore. It's understandable that they had so many. But Nina and David didn't worry much. There was no time for them. Every weekend, right after work, their car went clapping. As they traveled to their relatives, they stayed with them. But a little more, and the house they were building would be ready. A place to spend their old age, a place to rest from the noisy city. They chose, of course, Clappers. Subscribe and click the bell. A wedding at Mr. Matt's house was bound to make a lasting impression, above all on the owner of the mansion. The best people of the city fought for the right to sit at the same table with the most successful man in this part of the world. Wedding is not only beautiful gifts, fancy dress, and invited stars. It is also a great opportunity to discuss new contracts and share another piece of the pie, which economists will later call super income. Mr. Matt only needed to snap 2 fingers to have his table immediately covered with the best delicacies and delights. And the rumor was complicated by stars and celebrities. George was in charge of vegetables, the freshest tomatoes, peppers and cucumbers from his greenhouses, herbs and lots more. Charles claimed to have personally slaughtered a lamb, 2 piglets, and got into a real battle with chickens and turkeys, as long as there was enough meat and poultry on the table. Giovanni Greca, concerned about fish and seafood, salmon, tuna, shrimp, huge lobsters, and other select delicacies. But Luca Moretti and his family prepared a giant cake, which was too much even for this crowd of 200 guests. He delivered it together with a transparent refrigerator to the generators and placed it near the main table. Lower-ranking guests provided fresh bread and rolls, salads, appetizers, and other snacks, without which a wedding would never be a celebration. 2 themed areas were set up on a huge plot of land near the house. On one performed modern music compositions, on the other retro and classics of Franz Bianca. The most talented sound engineer of the present day arranged the musical streams so that they did not overlap. We Italians have to help each other, smiled Mr. Rinaldi, who was in charge of the groom, and coincidentally the bride's gorgeous dress. Like jewelry or heirlooms, vestments. Here we brought in a special box, inside of which was maintained microclimate. I'm an American, Mr. Matt said loudly, and put this place out of your mind. I beg your pardon, Mr. It's ingratiating, said Rinaldi. I meant to say we Americans should help each other. He had reason to be nervous. Today, the Rinaldi family was to go one step higher. From now on, He would take on the toughest challenges. Construction contracts on the coast would cover his skyscrapers. Sports arenas would spring up here and there, each of which he would keep a small stake in for the sake of management and profit. And his son, will get the most gorgeous and wealthy girl in this part of the earth. Where is James? Unceremoniously asked Mr. He's the one who should be standing here like a bayonet waiting for me to give the word. But you know the traditions, don't you? Once again looked ingratiatingly at the millionaire Rinaldi. He'll come with an orchestra. There will be a beautiful song and then a dance. Even if we've become Americans, that's no reason to forget the music. Ah, tradition. Mumbled we this. He wished this interminable day would come to a logical conclusion sooner. Talking in a panebristic manner to Mr. Rinaldi, the construction magnate, he was only hiding his own insecurity. Wacko needs Monica as much as she needs him. Or rather, he needs Mr. It needs this alliance to solidify its position and become all-powerful. The construction empire will take its rightful place in his business package along with manufacturing, tourism, and gambling. Yes, he is strong and powerful. No business is solved in the city without his weighty word, but his own financial strength is woefully lacking. The Rinaldi family are other wordless toilers. They can cover the whole world with these boring and tasty tasks, which, nevertheless, are very well worth and perfectly sold. They have huge circulating resources that will help it get stronger. Oh, Rinaldi said this and clapped his hands loudly. There's a tradition you and I have forgotten. Let's drink a glass of wine with cheese and meat in honor of our union with you, so that this day went as per notes. The groom's father smiled. He was beginning to feel uncomfortable with the nasty mood of it. But here he seemed to feel a little better when he remembered the meat and wine. As if by magic, a waiter with a huge tray appeared near them. How he could only hold the enormous tray. He meticulously selected a red dry wine with a long aging. Mr. It himself filled 2 glasses to the brim and held one out to Rinaldi. Let's raise a glass to the fact that our cities are united, proposed the master of the house, and like branches of noble grapes intertwined, and from them turned out a beautiful wine, which will be chased by the best houses of the world. Bottoms up. A fine toast. Praised Rinaldi. Unlike his vis-a-vis, he was not good at impromptu speeches, preferring to pay money to a professional writer. He's prepared an excellent speech for the ceremony. It's waiting on his tablet, but he forgot the welcome toast. That's all you're gonna say. Surprised. That's how he froze with his glass raised. I want to say, stretched Rinaldi and tried to gather his thoughts that our children with you will erect the world's tallest skyscraper. Rinaldi's name will be Rinaldi, and there will always be lights on all the floors for us. Meta touched his expensive glassware to his new relative. The toast was beautiful, but the fact that the family's proud surname was to be relegated to the background. Disappointing. It was an issue he'd forgotten to discuss when he dealt with all the formalities of the wedding. Nothing. The grandchildren may well want to carry his surname. Good thing it sounds beautiful. Well, Rinaldi said, the master of the house, emptying his glass and snacking on ham. It's time for me to check on our star guests. You haven't forgotten who will be performing on our stage tonight, have you? Of course, it would cost a fortune for an outsider to bring in so many celebrities. But many of them owed Mr. This the beginning of their careers, and therefore agreed to perform for free, and the millionaire only had to pay for the flight and hotel. It was already 5 o'clock, and the guests gradually began to arrive. They all approached Mr. Matt, shook his huge striped palm, and wished prosperity and prosperity to the new family. The master of the house wore a luxurious suit, despite the heat, but on his broad forehead did not even appear vapor. How wonderful is the weather. Mrs. Smith, the wife of the owner of a large retail chain, smiled. Specially for you, smiled back at Matt. Thank you for the cheeses you sent to our table. Oh, it's such a small thing. Mrs. Smith waved her hand. You should have seen the gift Angie prepared for our young ones. Would you sign a lifetime contract with us for your Italian oils? Mister, it's an exclusive contract. The landlord smiled even wider. But no, he thought haughtily. You can't buy me that cheap. Matta liked total control over the situation, and so every half hour his secretary, a charming girl named Anush, called him and reported whether everything was going according to plan. Chief of Security Tan reported every hour, reporting anything suspicious. If you see even a shadow. Leet whispered to Mr. Matta, talking to Tom. Nothing and no one should mar this day. That's right, Mr. Joe replied to head of security. The situation is under complete control. Mitta was very fond of his faithful guard, who resembled a dog in his devotion. The one by animal subtly felt his master. For example, it was he who came up with the idea to remake the name Giuseppe to the American form of Joe. The Mister was very pleased with that. Yes, that's what he started calling himself. The call came from Angie 5 minutes ahead of the checkout time. Mister said, the secretary, puzzled. We have a strange guest here. It's on the list. Roughly asked us this. Full control, in his opinion, did not mean diving into every detail. But since these nitwits can't do otherwise, no. Anush replied, lowering her voice. Between you and me, it's some ancient old woman. She's demanding you come down because of her diction. I can't understand whether she wants to give or take something. Put her on. I ordered it. Yes, Signora Mr. Giuseppe. There's an old lady whose voice is on the other end of the line. Mr. Giuseppe, who am I? Me? The millionaire's steely voice rang out. I don't recognize it. Measure for line, continued the old lady in her sweet voice. I happen to know that there was such a joyous occasion in your house that I couldn't pass by. You have no idea what a journey I have made. I came from far away. So we are strangers. Cut Matta off. I'm sorry, Signora, but I did not invite you to my house this day. I know you've forgotten. The old lady's, whose voice on the other end of the wire was getting louder. Don't worry, mister, don't worry. I'm not offended. I'm often forgotten now. I need Giuseppe's help. Asked the old woman and immediately switched to you. Only you can help me. Only you, Giuseppe. Put the phone back on, ma'am. A test of strength. Mr. Joe. The millionaire's broad forehead was showing from. He didn't sweat at all until he started to get nervous. Mr. Matt made a brief gesture to the waiter, literally one with a Coke. The one, as if having read the big boss's mind, ran up to him and swiped it neatly. It was as if the landlord was not on the phone, but performing a complex operation. He said, Mother, send this old woman away. And if she persists, call the police. The sheriff promised me they'd have a car around here somewhere. But Mr. Joe, outside, the secretary, she says she needs help and she has important information. I said drive. Demanded the millionaire not to bother me about such nonsense anymore. Because, you know, there's a whole line of people wanting to take your place. There were more and more guests. They were occupying a huge section of Mr. They were touring the luxurious interiors of his mansion. They tasted the appetizers and examined the table that was set right in the garden. The stylists finished decorating the photo area, and a good dozen photographers were walking around the guests so that everyone could fill their ribbon with great pictures. Now we need to get to the most enjoyable part of this ceremony. His daughter, his baby girl, is finally going to jump out in marriage. This furtively brushed a tear off his prickly cheek. Soon, very soon, he will be babysitting his grandchildren, teaching them how to shoot a slingshot and kick a soccer ball. The phone rang again. I told you to drive that damned old woman to hell. Trial of strength. Millionaire, Mr. Mehta. Stammering, said the secretary. It seems, there's been an emergency. What kind of emergency? Calmly, the head of the family clarified. He was famous for his ability to keep his composure in any, even the most difficult situation. A catastrophe. Anish screamed. 3 or 4 o'clock before the fateful call of his assistant, Mr. Ito decided to make sure that both the dress and hair of Monica correspond to the highest level of the ceremony organized by him. His daughter decided well in the guest house where all her friends and girlfriends were comfortably accommodated. Matt let them walk around all night and even paid for the food and drinks himself. That's an unprecedented move on his part. As long as the kids were happy. He explained his act to the head of security, who was worried about safety, keeping an eye on them, but through his fingers. The kids, most of whom were now approaching the age of 25, didn't fail, didn't break anything, didn't cause the police to be called. And if anyone was being domineering, it wasn't his daughter, or she did it without anyone noticing. Now in the room were workers to this ring. When young people want to continue hiding from the adults, everything should be ready. Very young boys and girls were arranging a slide of glasses through which the champagne would soon flow. And one waiter looked Mr. It straight in the eye and smiled impishly. Where on earth had he seen him? Ignoring the familiarity of the millionaire strode to the second floor. He kicked the hairdresser and makeup artists out of his daughter's room and asked her girlfriends to leave. Then he rose from his chair and meticulously examined Monica, trying to find the slightest flaw. But no, everything was perfect. Did his daughter, his pride and joy, really look like the $5-6 million he had invested in this wedding? "Congratulations to you, daughter," he whispered, hugging Monica gently. The main thing was not to wrinkle the dress or damage the makeup. The photos will decorate the main news feeds of the agencies, and therefore should not drop the authority of Matt's family. Challenged with what? Monica asked. With being able to tie your business to the Rinaldi family. Mr. This froze like thunderstruck. From whom but his daughter? A clever and calculating girl. He didn't expect to hear anything like that. After all, he had offered her a choice of 3 suitors, and she herself had settled on Vasco. The young man, of course, was a bit of a god, and in his Mr. This presence, he generally swallowed his tongue like a snake. But all in all, the guy was great, and he certainly loved her. He loved her. Yeah, the guy's a slob. But that's exactly what Monica needed. And importantly, with the financial ability to fulfill all her needs, which can grow over the years. "What do you mean by that?" Dad asked. "What I mean is shut up," suddenly shouted Mr. I don't even want to hear it. "Any girl in your place would be dancing with joy. And you're just as nosy as ever. Why don't you ever want to hear me?" Monica asked, and there were tears in her eyes, and there were tears in her eyes. "Everything I do for you and for the family," replied Mr. This, trying to give his capital voice tenderness. "You should be grateful to me. You know James is not the hero of my novel," sighed Monica. "Yes, we'll settle well. He loves me. He's been very gentle with me. But to live with him all my life, I'd die of homesickness." Mr. thought about it. He certainly shouldn't have upset his daughter on a day like this. She will marry James anyway. It was a done deal. But she'd remember his pressure and despotism for the rest of her life. Which means she'll hate him. I had to sweeten the pill. Fortunately, he had already taken care of this issue a month ago and prepared a gift that would make any girl fly to the 7th heaven with delight. "Forgive me, darling. Forgive my pressure and this arrogant tone. You know how hard it is to make these decisions, but I'm the one who takes full responsibility for them. Here you go." We said it, holding out a ring to our daughter. "I've prepared a gift for you." "What is it?" asked the bride. "It's a real heirloom." With delight, said the father of the family. "Can you believe that this trinket was worn by the wife of the first president of this glorious country?" Monica looked at the ring meticulously. It looked really beautiful, but was it worth spending a lot of money on something like that? The girl imagined how her father's men had gotten it. Maybe they had stolen it from a museum. And what if they hadn't? She didn't even want to think about that. "Wear it with pride." We said it solemnly. "It's a gift from me personally. And do not forget for a second, dear, that we are Americans with an Italian surname," sarcastically said Monica. "What's the point of all this? Are we Italian, American, or Jewish? What's the difference? How dare you?" Matta was indignant, Me and my parents have endured abuse and insults all my life, just so that you could be representatives of this God-chosen nation. And without my last name, no important issue is decided in this city. Isn't that God's plan? I've told you 100 times I'm not interested. Monica snapped at me. I just want to make my own music. You hear it. There she went again, talking about her stupid songs. Joe was already cursing the day many, many years ago when he'd given his daughter a guitar and taught her a few chords. Yes, she sang wonderfully, but he'd seen her financiers with brains like hers. She could multiply her family's fortune 10 or 20 times over. What awaits her on the stage? First, you have to invest a whole ton of money without any guarantees of return. A star's career lasts 5 or 10 years. And then what? But no, you can't take any chances. Even though I'm American, we said it threateningly, losing control of ourselves. But I might as well take an Italian whip and tap dance on your international ass. Sorry, Poe, immediately replied Monica, who understood the reality of such threats. The best men in town and country are doing your wedding. Couldn't settle down. Millionaire, do me the courtesy of at least smiling. Keep your thoughts to yourself. What's gotten into you today anyway? Because I'm in love with someone else. Monica explained. Who? Mr. Matt asked. He was going to explain to her that you can live with one person and love another. The main thing is to do it carefully, so as not to create rumors and speculation. And as soon as Monica opened her mouth, the phone rang. Tony Class, the eccentric billionaire Mr. Joe had pinned his hopes on, had arrived. Not a word. Asked it, raising his hand. I love you, daughter, Mr. Tony, said the master of the household in as kind a tone as his speech apparatus was capable of. What an honor and a surprise. I'm on my way. So the guests have arrived. The tables are bursting with refreshments, and the musicians on both stages still continue to fill the air with beautiful melodies. However, Monica is missing, and there's no clarity on her disappearance. The saddest part is that no one saw where she went, neither her stylist, makeup artist, nor her girlfriends. It's like she vanished into thin air. It's Mr. This is the dilemma of canceling the wedding or hoping that Monica's kidnapping is a bad joke. Santi, her best friend, was crying, clutching a teddy bear in her hands and somehow nursing herself back to health for what had happened. The local police office sent 2 detectives at once to speed up the investigation. The gentleman went along with it. His weight was too high. Tell me again, asked one detective, tall, thin, addressing Santa. But no tears. Honey, what happened? Musicians in traditional Mexican attire entered the guest house. She was sobbing. I don't know who booked them. They started playing their songs, doing round dances with us. When I came to my senses, I saw that Monica was nowhere to be found, and I sounded the alarm. How long did the singing, dancing, and destruction of tequila last? The tall detective asked. I don't even know. Stretched out to Sante. Maybe 20 minutes, or more. And when was the last time you saw Monica? Santi looked expressively at Matt, tearing up again. When her dad, Mr. Joe, came by and kicked us out, she said. And that was before the Mexican band. Maybe she went somewhere else, asked the second detective, the short, fat one. His appearance was so disgruntled that Mr. This felt like giving him 105 to lighten his mood a little. The phone was left on the bed, declared Sante with renewed vigor. And after all, she doesn't go anywhere without her phone. The 2 guards that were on duty outside the guest house didn't see anything suspicious. On behalf of Mr. This, they questioned all the youths and waiters, writing explanatory notes on behalf of everyone. But where had his daughter disappeared to? In her gorgeous dress, no one had noticed. Now the short, fat detective was leafing through the notes, and his disgruntled look grew even more grim. For a moment, the policemen looked at each other and took up their positions beside Mr. This case sucks, said the disgruntled cop, short in stature. If it's a kidnapping, it's a masterstroke. Hats off, as they say. Do you think it's funny? asked millionaire Mr. Joe. If it is a crime, do you have any enemies? Do you have ill wishers? Do you have any idea who might have kidnapped her? Asked the thin and tall Detective Stanley, thoughtfully biting his pencil. Who? Roared Mr. Matt. Yes, any cretin who has a desire to become $1 billion or two richer, or whatever the usual demands are for kidnappers, daughters, millionaires. Have you been given any demands yet? Detective Brandon clarified. This bigwig with the loud voice was starting to annoy him, like a whole bunch of self-righteous assholes, a bunch of them in his precinct. No, none at all. Pulled Matt. The groom's dead. The cops looked at each other. Are we having a murder? Asked Stanley. No, waved his hands at the millionaire hobbit morally. He loves my daughter very much. Was it really painful to look at you? He sobbed like a girl, trying to tell his side of the story. They'd been dating for 6 months, but they'd only slept together a handful of times. It wasn't the Italian upbringing, it was Monica's nasty temper. We knew that American women treated flat relationships differently than Italian women. Sleeping with 2 or 3 guys before marriage in the US equated to complete innocence, and his daughter was so caught up in local tradition that she could pass for a Native American woman in terms of sexual freedom, but she preferred to keep you on starvation rations, an approach he understood and even shared. Detective Brendan looked out the window from the 2nd floor of the guest house. There was a stunning view of the courtyard. Beautiful music was playing, some kind of country music. The blue pool rippled in the sunlight. Now I'd like to throw off my jacket, shirt, and pants and dive into this sinful water. And call for the waiter with an ice-cold drink. His partner stood beside him and stared at the courtyard, and stared at the courtyard too. They had been together so long that they had learned to read each other's minds. It caught both of their eyes as a girl with a short haircut, dressed in black pants and a white blouse, bustled about the property. She was rushing only to some guests, who to others, explaining something to them. The detectives looked at each other. This is your secretary, Mr. Joe, asked Stanley, pointing to the agile girl. Secretary about it. He hated it when they added all those suffixes and endings to normal male professions. And don't you dare utter feminism in my house. Stanley was silent. Oh, those rich people, the detective thought. Their own quirks. She's the one who sounded the alarm. So invite her here, Brenton asked. And please, let's not waste our time on the subtleties of the English language. We detectives mostly use the unprinted version, but it's not like we brag about it on every corner. The guests had no idea that this was an emergency at the multimillionaire's house. The music continued to play, photographers took pictures, and animators kept the audience entertained. Waiters were passing cold drinks and appetizers. You can't fool these people, though. Successful people have something like a sixth sense that tells them the right decision. The richest and most powerful. They were getting nervous. Being out here in the sun all day wasn't part of their plan. Tony Case, eccentric inventor and billionaire, is already tweeting about it. It's past 12 o'clock. Still no young people. Did he write, will there be a wedding today? Will there be a wedding today? Or are we talking about a grand dress rehearsal? A few words for the press. Shouted Tony, beckoned the receptionist. That's my joy. What's all the fuss about? I love tedious waiting, but today it was too tedious. And Mr. Tony shrugged her shoulders. There's such a thing, you know, such a thing. A life-saving phone call. Mr. It barked into the receiver to urgently go up to the 2nd floor of the guest house. Angie gave Kesa another smile, promised to look into everything, and rushed to her patron. Although the girl wasn't in charge of security and was the first to sound the alarm, she still felt a keen sense of guilt to think Monica was missing. This is a charming and intelligent girl, her bitterest competitors in the fight, and for Mine's. Her fiercest rivals in the battle for Mine's attention, it seems to have dissolved. Mr. Joe, she screamed. What do we do, Mr. Joe? First, calm down, said it in her steely voice. Second, listen to these gentlemen. I'll call a council, and decide how to proceed with the wedding. The millionaire went into the next room and picked up the telephone. His active soul wanted to move, to investigate, to find out. But he understood nothing of police business. On the contrary, he had always avoided meetings with officers of the law. Of course, he had something to hide from the law and the authorities. But now, alas, he could not do without them. We'll have to put up with it. This neighborhood is annoying. Shall we split up? Brandon suggested. You keep staying at the guest house, and I'll start watching the video. I bet. We'll find the answers to any question we want to ask. Stanley nodded his mind. Brenton's is organized in such a way that he's better able to work with a vast array of information. Where the average person would have a stupor, this full-blown detective showed marvels of acumen. The detective went into the next room, where there was a high table, and began to arrange his gadgets on it. Good idea, Stanley said. All he had to do was talk to Fatty's secretary. The huge leather couch was just the right size for tall Stanley. His feet rested on the ground while he leaned on the backrest, a blissful position for a Russian to sit in. The detective felt that this young beauty with the short haircut could definitely be useful to him. But in what way? My name is Stanley, he said to the girl, Detective Stanley. We're investigating the kidnapping of Monica this. Simple, she replied. Call me. Angela, what a rare name, smiled Stan. But the girl didn't react. So, you were the first to sound the alarm. My partner and I saw through the window how you literally calmed the neighborhood and probably saw all the guests. That's right, the girl replied. Mr. Maitredi ordered me to personally check everyone. Checked, the detective clarified. At the entrance, I made sure the invitation matched the list. He's a sexist, you know, in a good way. Guests don't like all those guards he wants. A young girl's a different matter. Well, there you go. Stanley interrupted her. Did you see anything suspicious? Maybe some plumbers or alleged police officers entering the house. The maid of honor says there was a Mexican concert. That's the plan, she said. I already gave the band's contacts to the security guard. We booked the Mexicans a month ago. The girl thought there was a lot more to the program. She almost cried. An illusionist. 2 Hollywood actors with small performances, a couple of world stars. It was a shame that all her work had gone to waste. Although, of course, there were other people involved in the organization. Then maybe the detective held out. Maybe you just want to tell me something. Not necessarily something suspicious, something that would help the investigation. Water nodded her head. I have something to say. Just not here. Let's get away from him. Away from who? The detective was surprised. He nodded expressively towards the room where we were also supposed to assemble our council. Yes, Anash whispered. At this time, the master of the mansion was indeed preparing to hold a meeting. In any unclear situation, he arranged for an extended gathering. So how was the kidnapping of his daughter worse? The mother then called the deputies who were also present at Mr. Rinaldi's wedding. Then he thought about it and decided to go to extreme measures, even calling his own wife. Who did I forget? Matt thought to himself. And at that very second, his expensive phone rang. Mr. Joe, Diego Maradona has arrived, reported the head of security. Where are we taking him? Do you have any idea what happened? Screamed the Mata. Yes, the Tom replied without embarrassment. There were rumors that he died. But that's Maradona. How could he miss your daughter's wedding? Tom shouted, it's my daughter who's missing. Missing? Surprised the head of security. Where to, Mr. Joe? I have no idea. The millionaire roared. My daughter's missing. And you're fired. Go to hell out there. Brandon hated working in such an environment of a huge number of people, but most importantly, the snacks and booze that literally dotted all around. And beautiful girls giving him long, piercing stares. The detective yelled at a good dozen guests of employees, while he managed to pull himself together. He seized on his hard drive, videotapes, photos labeled who and which ones he had been given. At this point, a citywide siege plan was put into effect. Dozens of cops were searching cars, combing train stations and airports. Bullshit. He's investigated a dozen kidnappings in his career. The perps always made the same mistake. They talked too much. They'd leave a trail. Brands, like dogs. All that was left was to get that scent and come up with the intruders, Stanley said excitedly as the detective dialed his partner. I think I got it. I got something. You hear that? Let's talk to that uncle again. Early in his career, Brandon had memorized his own cases in great detail. Even a month or two later, he could recite any case, quote interrogation reports and expert testimony. But gradually the cases became similar to each other. In recent years, it was already difficult for him to recall the details of solved crimes. And of all the kidnappings, he could remember only one, which ended in a major failure. However, his fault in what happened was not at all. The boy's parents were reluctant to go to the police. Brenda started looking for the intruders on the third day of the kidnapping, and all he found was a breathless body. Here, look, said Brandon, setting the tablet in front of Matt and Stanley, who came in 5 minutes later. I took a quick look at the videotapes. So our little girl went missing between 17 UI 1730. Let's just say he got it. He suddenly felt old and also devilishly tired. So what of it? Do you know why I thought that? Asked the detective, because at 16:45 your daughter was caught in the lens of a girlfriend. They took selfies. That matches the explanation of her march. And around 6:00 p.m., you realize she was missing. Half an hour later, we arrived. What was the next thing the millionaire muttered? You want to brag that you're a little good at your job. Not at all, smiled Brandon. I asked you to come here for a minute for a completely different reason. My question is this: who did the dress? Why did such a question arise in the first place? Angry. It's a completely stupid question. Just the way I like it. We're just wasting time arguing, said the detective. But I was gonna show you anyway. Look, don't you find anything odd? Brandon pressed the space bar and the laptop started playing the video from the surveillance camera installed behind the guest house. It showed a waiter pushing in front of him the very crate in which the bride's dress had been delivered. At some point he looked away and the Raven detective pressed stop. The face, of course, was problematic to see, but some features could be caught. Stanley snapped a picture of the screen on his phone and stepped aside to send out an orientation. In a strange coincidence, the other cameras in our hero's path didn't work, said Brandon. I told the interrogator to go all the way to the end. He says there's a fire entrance. It's all covered in sidewalk tile. No footprints. It's hard to tell if someone picked the lock or not. Forensics already took samples. See if there's any trace, but I'm guessing it was this waiter who rolled the crate out. It's all right. Mr. Joe, engrossed in his monologue, he didn't notice his companion turned pale. The millionaire kept staring at the freeze frame. He must have listened to the fiery speech too, absorbed in his own thoughts. No way, Mata whispered, clenching his fists. He felt his head begin to spin, as if the car under his control had flipped over and was flying into the abyss. It can't be. Do you know who that is? Asked Stanley. He was watching the millionaire closely. He was also digesting the information he had received 5 minutes ago from Angie. He would have bellowed this. My girl's in mortal danger, detectives. I bet it was my nephew who cut those. Stanley's been working the last few months. He'd already made up his mind to quit the force. And though he was only 37 years old, he'd had enough. His young children were growing up completely autonomous, communicating with their father by phone and correspondence. His wife threw scandals almost every day. And at work, the big bosses clapped him on the shoulders and asked him to stay on for another year. Or better yet, 5 more years. Richard Stanley said the chief of police was hesitant to sign his letter of resignation. You're good. You're damn good. Who needs you but us and your family? Answered the detective. Stanley had already decided for himself that as soon as he found the daughter of this thick-skinned man, he would immediately go on vacation and start looking for a job. And he's not going back to the police station. After all, is it his fault that there are so many crimes going on in this city and so few cops who can investigate them quickly and correctly? And do you like your job? Asked the detective, as they walked down the corridors of the guest house. Yes, smiled the girl. It's the best job on earth. I just can't seem to find a man, or at least a boyfriend at Mr. This, you know, has a bad reputation in that regard. Right this way. She opened the door and gestured for me to come inside. She looked carefully to make sure there were no intruders. It's all right. This is where the mops were put. Buckets here stored sponges and other things needed to put things in order. There was a smell of cleaning supplies in the room that the detective liked very much. 2 days ago, some strange people came to see Mr. This said, when they were alone in a room on the first floor. The room was cramped, and there was nowhere to sit down. If he finds out what I told you, he'll be furious, detective. And he'll definitely fire me. You hear that? Where did you go? Stanley asked. To his house. No, we started with our heads again. They didn't go into the house. He talked to them at the guard post. And then one of the guys told me that Mr. Joe took out a whole wad of money and shoved it in their hands. You think? Asked the detective. Do you think he's hiding something? Yes, definitely. Nodded the girl. He knows more than we do, and Monica didn't want this wedding. She told you that? Stanley was surprised. No, we weren't friends. She used to be very jealous of her father. She even threw a couple of tantrums, said we spent too much time together, even alone. What's that? Laughing. The girl shrugged. He likes his daughters to fight for him, by his own helpers. So what makes you think Monica didn't want a wedding? Stanley asked. She had a lover, answered the girl. I can tell you something if it stays between us. You have my word, nodded Stanley. At my request, the Tom was looking after her, said the girl. Monica was meeting this guy in an apartment in the city. He might know the address. Stanley thought that such an outcome would be most curious. The girl had faked her own kidnapping to get money out of her father. But no, it's too complicated. And it's obviously the wrong day. No, all girls want to get married, even if it's the daughters of millionaires. And this pretty girl is probably just jealous of the girl and wants to make sure she's not found. Is that all? Stanley asked. I think this information will help the progress of the investigation. Can I go now? She asked. I think we've worked something out with the wedding. And I need to get back to him so I can be there for him and do what he says. Suddenly, Arsh approached the detective abruptly, took him by the hem of his jacket, leaned over and kissed him gently on the lips and smiled. You're all right, she said playfully and left the room. Stanley was faced with a different task. Renee was literally bursting with pride in her own person. To accomplish such a thing alone. Of course, he'd had help from his brother Jerome, who'd helped get him a waiter at the lavish wedding and provided him with false papers. He hated the Mata family, so he was happy to mess with them. But could Jerome imagine that his brother would risk such a thing? Cousin Giovanni also supported Reen. It was he who helped to push the heavy box into his van and was now driving to the hiding place. But the rest is a solo composition that Reen performed alone. Out of pleasure and joy, he belted out an old Italian song, and Giovanni immediately backed him up with his powerful voice. Without taking his eyes off the road, Reen asked. He couldn't stand it when other men sang along with him. You and I are carrying a very valuable cargo. What's in there? With a gasp, asked Giovanni. Oh, 45 kilograms of pure gold, smiled Rene. He had a reputation as a joker. Therefore, the cousin wrote what he said with a sense of humor. I hope you know what you're doing, said Giovanni, because I'd hate to go back to prison. Don't worry, pronounced Rene. When you find out what kind of scam I pulled, you'll be over the moon. And your young brother will never give you up. You know I'm tough. Besides not being a joker, We all knew about his strong-willed Italian character. Indeed, if he decided to keep quiet, all the police in the world could not get a word out of him. That's why Giovanni decided to help his brother. Besides, if the cops came after him, he could always play the hoser and pretend that he didn't understand the claims at all. "Do you really want to know what's in there?" Rene asked suddenly. "No, I've changed my mind." Laughter. If suddenly Hawaii catches up with me, and I don't know anything. After a year in jail, Giovanni promised himself and his mother to quit crime. He bought an old bus and started hauling freight. The guy loved to work and was ready to spend 14 o'clock a day behind the wheel, which is not typical for Italians. But alas, after the stray criminal money, his income promised to be better. He could even live behind the wheel of his bus, sleep there, and take any job he wanted. It would still only be enough to make ends meet. Rene had given him 300 for an hour's ride, and the Joker clearly had more work to do. If you're really careful, they'll never get caught. "Listen, listen," Joe said, keeping his eyes on the road. "Maybe you've got a theme in mind. We could play it together and make a big score." "But no, brother," said Balaguer, pointing to an inconspicuous garage entrance. "I'm not into crime. Turning here. You know I have a singing career ahead of me. Soon enough, the whole coast will be talking about me. You'll see and you'll hear." He began to sing another song in his velvet voice. Giovanni envied this young artist. He was really good, and how did he feel about the guitar? Could it be that he had really decided to stick it out to the old folks to get away on stage? And why not? They say that all more or less big American stars used to be backed by the Italian mafia. Together, they gave a guy a gift. They unloaded a large human-sized briefcase and carefully rolled it to the corner of the garage. The guy hugged Giuseppe tightly and gave him a brotherly kiss on both cheeks. The driver wiped a tear that appeared at him from emotion, waved goodbye, and sent. After driving 100 meters away, he jumped out of the cab and returned the real license plates and the stolen ones, on which he had been driving until that moment. He rolled up in a ram's horn and stuck them under the eastern pipe. No dog would ever find them. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Mr. Matta was restless. To think his nephew had cut his way into his wedding and rolled out his personal dress case, most likely with his daughter. There's one question inside, though, that hasn't gone anywhere. How he got her inside. Monica had to fight back. It would have taken a whole gang of kidnappers to break her resistance. How did this young man cut these? Pulled off such a daring plan all by himself? No, whispered it while pouring whiskey into a huge glass. No, he has accomplices. I will find them. I will find them. And I will make them talk. Whatever it takes. "Now, Mr. Rinaldi," Stanley said, looking at the groom's father. "Take a good look at this picture. Do you recognize anyone?" The detective showed him the image taken from Brendan's laptop. The detective looked at the screen and sighed. "I told you, I spoke out of anger," Rinaldi whispered. "Let's hire professionals. Let's spend it on security. Let's not waste any time." Stanley asked Monica. "It was probably kidnapped." "That's for sure," said Rinaldi. "If it's a detective case, I'll recognize the valise. It's always carried the dress for our princess." "Tell me more about it," Stanley asked. "It's quite an expensive dress," explained the groom's father. "It requires a special humidity and temperature. This case maintains it. Well, it's kind of like a refrigerator. Could it fit a person inside?" "I think so," said Rinaldi. "Especially if it's a hidden girl." "Can the temperature be regulated?" asked Stanley. "Of course," nodded the father of the groom, "and the humidity." The detective scratched his chin thoughtfully. In another situation, he would have assumed that Rinaldi was involved in the kidnapping, but he had absolutely no motive to commit this crime. Now he and his failed brother-in-law were on display. "Let me ask you a personal question," Stanley said. "Suppose I'm a kidnapper and I want to put up a ransom for Matt's daughter. How much should I ask for? Between you and me, "He's not doing well," Rinaldi said. "He's rich in assets, but you can't pull a lot of money out of them overnight. I don't think he can do more than 10 million. Who do you think would want to kidnap the girl?" The detective asked. "I have no idea." Rinaldi shrugged. "One thing I can say for sure, if he didn't think he was smarter than all of us put together, it wouldn't have happened." Anger, longing overwhelmed his soul. Rinaldi didn't feel sorry for the 1 million he'd spent on the wedding, and even the gorgeous dress for Monica, which she clearly didn't deserve. He didn't care at all. Reputation was another matter. Unless this trickster could figure out how to get out of the situation, he needed to be distanced from him immediately. Rinaldi couldn't believe that such a thing was possible in modern America. It seemed that the era of the relationship between Italians was in the distant past. Even his father was no more than a respectable American, much less his son. James held his own in this situation. He was, of course, discouraged by the news that his fiancée had been kidnapped, but he kept his spirits up. "Detective," Rinaldi asked, "let me ask you a question. What are the chances of finding our beauty alive?" And of course, "Well, it usually takes up to 3 days to solve a kidnapping," Stanley explained. "The next limit is a week. If the person is not found within that period, the chances of rescue are close to 0. "But pardon me," Rinaldi said. "You said but." "Yes," nodded the detective, "if we're talking about classic kidnappings. But there is a nuance. NIPRO claims within 24 hours or immediately after the crime, and here there's silence. It's strange." Looking at the general merriment, it brought tears to my eyes. Annoyed, he walked out into the crowd. After a short meeting with his aides and wife, he had made his decision, and yet he was terribly reluctant to announce it. As much as Mr. Joni would delay this moment, action must be taken. The musicians stopped playing music, all eyes fixed on him. The master of the house. Taking the microphone from the host's hands, he exhaled loudly and said, "Dear guests, my favorite close and dear people. Unfortunately, trouble has come to this house instead of a wedding." A murmur ran through the courtyard. Not only the guests, but also the waiters were talking. An impressionable woman fainted and her clumsy husband accidentally broke an expensive champagne flute. "My daughter, Monica," Nestor whispered. That disappeared for nothing, with no explanation. "The police are already working here at the mansion. If any of you are asked any questions, please do not refuse to answer them. Maybe it'll save my little girl's life. Yes, God bless you all." The homeowner's words had the effect of a bomb going off. Dozens of people immediately rushed to the exit. She used to try to sift out the most high-status and expensive guests to take them out separately. She darted through the crowd, which was becoming less and less organized. Some stepped aside to let the flow past them. The lyricist triumphed, though, getting new information on her phone. What started out as a dreary wedding of millionaires risked turning into a posh report into the story of the 100th anniversary. Basically, she didn't care about Monica's fate if she was raped or killed. It would only spice things up. Of course, such things couldn't be said out loud. But no one forbade her to think a red-hot thought. This story would help her climb to the top of the journalistic Olympus. Getting a foothold in the profession, human reaction helped her. She instantly turned on the photo and video cameras on her phone, instantly typed out the news. Right now, her journalistic flair and a little hint helped her make the only right decision, going to the party disguised as a photographer. She had taken wonderful shots and with complete impunity. Now she had to make the right choice. Most likely, it would be better to hide in the mansion, to hide and listen and see if she could record anything. She'd spotted the cops with her battered eyes earlier. Both Brandon and Stanley were familiar to her. Now the landlord had to talk to the guests again, but this time to receive from them endless wishes of support and offers of help. Powerless and devastated, we shook each hand and endured it, each touch on their own shoulder. The very last man in this mournful procession was the father of the groom. But no words of encouragement were heard from him by Mr. Joe. If security in this house is so low, Mr. Rinaldi said, when there's no one else around. Should we think of uniting our capitals? What are you talking about? Matt's wheeze wore on a powerful rebuke. He had no more left. I'm doing everything in my power to find Monica. You're under the impression that she may have faked her own kidnapping, says the estranged relative. He said she wasn't sure how she felt. How dare he? Mr. Mata shouted, my daughter is the cleverest and most beautiful girl. She adores her father, and she adores you too. She wouldn't talk such nonsense. I told him the same thing, Rinaldi replied. But the smile on his face didn't please Mr. Joe. Did you also tell the kid what it means to lock in a loss? To lock in a loss? The millionaire questioned Mr. Joe, although he was well aware of such a word combination. How to fix it? Yes, yes, Rinaldi nodded. There was no longer that ingratiating tone in him. It was more confident. Kid. Unlike us, Mr. Joe never went through bankruptcy. That empty feeling when you realize you're left with nothing. But you and I have been through it. Monica's probably his first major loss. I explained to the kid that he needs to get over it. Listen to Rinaldi. Mr. Mata grabbed his visor by the jacket. We'll find her tomorrow, the day after tomorrow at the latest, and we'll play the Dan wedding. We'll build the whole coast with your skyscrapers. Do you hear, Giuseppe? Rinaldi said softly, pulling away. I said, fixing the losses with my little boy. He has fully accepted our updated strategy. Together we are going to discover new markets. Nothing personal, just business. Of course, with your abilities, we could accomplish a lot, as could you with our hands. But there is providence, and there is the voice of God. On the coast. That's what our wedding whispered. The coast is not the end of the world. In a conciliatory tone, said the construction magnate. We can do anything. I've long been ready to switch to building subways or social housing in Mexico, or building individual bomb shelters. I hear there's a huge demand for them now, like during the Cold War. Do you really think I'm doing all this to grow my empire? Didn't you? The master of the house was surprised. Not at all. Rinaldi replied. I only wanted my boy Vasco to be happy. Bless you, Giuseppe. I'm sure your daughter will return. I'm sure you can get her married. Profitable. But another time, perhaps we should ask her consent. The millionaire was completely overwhelmed. The guests, who only a few hours ago were ready to drink and eat from his hands, were leaving the mansion. Along with them, his soul was filling up, a vague sense of unease. The last time he defended it was in 2008, hours before the mortgage default kicked in. Fortunately, he was able to survive that crisis with an extremely broad portfolio of investments. Why did that pinching sense of dread overtake his soul? Now, sitting in the closet was uncomfortable. River was glad he hadn't been tempted to try all those dozens of wines and other beverages the tables at the ceremony were bursting with. Once inside the guest house, she chose the right room and decided to hide there. Finding it wasn't easy, but the landmarks helped. 20 minutes later, she heard a familiar voice. She did. The detectives and I were discussing her daughter's disappearance. Rika surreptitiously turned on the recorder and prepared to listen. One last conversation, and we'll leave you to it, Stanley said. You see, we can't escape the feeling that there's another factor. Did Brandon help him, which you're either hiding from us or deeming irrelevant? I told you where to find her. The Mata roared. Don't you see who's making my whole life go to hell? We can't break into Mister's house, Stanley said calmly, even if his nephew was here, even if he stole the dress case. Besides, Rinaldi had made no claim to the thing. Moreover, Brenton said, it might well have been a distraction. But you must agree, who would draw so much attention to themselves by stealing such a huge structure? It appeared on his forehead again. Those cheeks had already figured out everything, right down to who the ill-fated briefcase belonged to. They'd be looking for his daughter at the same rate. He hated it when anyone taught him how to work, though. Who knows if the esteemed cop is as sentimental about these matters as he is. Let's try to remember, said Detective Stanley in his calm voice. Was there anything strange on the day your daughter went missing or in the days before? Strange. Pulled. There was. Some old woman came by today. Brandon was surprised. What's so strange about it? She talked, said she had some information for me, and she asked for help, said to come down. What did she say? Asked the detective. I have no idea. The millionaire shrugged. I told her to get her out of here. You didn't remember the name, of course, the cop said. Why not? It was desperate for praise, as in the old days, when his every silly joke was met with thunderous laughter. I keep hundreds of names and numbers in my head. Detective. So name it. The name that was just rolling around on my tongue slipped away. The millionaire started snapping his fingers, as if trying to catch the words by their tails. Oh shit. What was his name? I've heard that name before. Disappointed detective tired of waiting for the resurrection in the memory of the cherished last name, and was about to leave the room with his colleague. But in the doorway, Wyatt was called out to them both. Remembered. Excitedly whispered the millionaire. Her name was Mira for the line. That's how she introduced herself when we spoke on the phone, and Anish dialed me. That was at about 4:30 p.m. Gentlemen. You see, I'm not that old yet. That's for sure. Brandon asked, scratching his chin. You're not confusing anything. No, Angry answered we are. I told you, I have an excellent memory. You wanted details. I remembered them. The thing is, said Brandon, I know this woman, or rather, these details. Well, then dig, Inspector Dig. Mr. Joe yelled, dig in that direction. Mr. Mehta, tell me honestly, are you kidding me? The journalist became suspicious. The names and surnames spoken up to that point said nothing. But when she heard the Pasolini Prize, the journalist perked up. Could she be the one? Taking out Rick's iPhone, she began to write a short note Tuck sketched. If suddenly now her hunch was confirmed, no need to demand so much from fate. Luck, of course, love's preparation, but also restraint and modesty, the very qualities that Rika could never boast of. The telephone, a journalist's main weapon, thought Rika, trying to stretch her legs. Everything here has cameras to take cool pictures. A notepad to quickly jot down a note. And then there's the internet, where you can always get the information you need. If I didn't know your boss, roared the Matt, I'd call you a puppy, for no one here. No one is allowed to say in my house that I'm bullying. If you're not bullying, that's even worse. The detective hissed. Brendan held back, but with great difficulty. To gain access to Signora, the ruin, you really had to dig. In the truest sense of the word. All because her funeral had taken place 3 weeks ago. Grandma passed away, quietly and peacefully. What can't be said for the valuables that were stored in her vintage apartment? While the old lady waited for her own nameless body to be discovered, someone took everything they could get their hands on. Brandon was on duty when the call came in. This was way out of his league and out of his specialty. After all, burglaries can be handled by rookie cops. They could be investigated by investigators with good agency or serious leads. The brand had a non-trivial reason for such a case. One of the items stolen from the old lady was a real heirloom. You see, Mr. Mehta, said the detective, I don't believe in coincidences, and there are so many in this case, it's sickening. Do you know who Measure is? Of course not. The millionaire waved his hand. I just remembered the name. And that was the name of the grandmother who wanted to see me this morning. What's the matter? You don't see. The world's behind the lines. Passed away some time ago. The old lady was well-to-do, explained the detective. She owned Martha Washington's ring. Quite officially. What's the matter? Are you sick? No. The answer is, Mister, it's paler. I'm fine. These worries are about my daughter and more. So talk to this poor collector. You see, Martha Washington's ring is a real heirloom, said Brandon. Oh, come on, I'm sorry. We're just wasting time. We got work to do. Let's go to the walls. No. Tell me, the millionaire asked. I'm very curious. What's the deal with this ill-fated ring? All right, it won't take long anyway. Brandon waved his hand. That ring is worth an insane amount of money. The entire state police are focused on finding it. Shortly before the mayor's death, the line was going to donate it to the National Museum. It was a long negotiation, but alas, and what are the penalties for a man who stole such a ring? We asked in as calm a voice as possible. I don't know. Probably, shrugged Brandon. I think that the kidnappers simply do not realize what treasure has fallen into his dirty clutches. You see, a trinket like that might be worth 1,010,000 or 20. Yeah, you could get killed for something like that. Mister, this is bad for you. The millionaire collapsed on the floor. Stanley, who had hitherto remained silent, ran up to the millionaire and grabbed him by the shoulders. Took his pulse. Everything was normal. The cops looked at each other. Mr. Jones sat up, rubbing his temples. We need to talk. Mata whispered. No time to talk to my lawyer, Brandon said gruffly. This is your daughter's life we're talking about. If you have something to say, spit it out right now. I saw that ring, said the millionaire. He was terrified that he had brought his daughter to the brink of death himself. Had you seen it? Surprised Detective Brandon. When I bought that ring. Mata whispered. You did, but I had no idea it was stolen. No idea. Then why did you buy it? Asked the cop. Don't you understand? The millionaire waved his hand. If you, like me and my parents, had been in the skin of a migrant, when I got my American passport, I swore that I would never leave this country and I would never cede it to anyone. And the ring of the wife of the first president, Hugo. Stanley smiled. And those, shall we say, antique lovers knew what they were selling you. Yes, they did. Shrugged Mata's shoulders. Oh, shit. I'm the one who told them I was going to give my daughter a gift for her daughter. The detectives looked at each other. Stanley pulled out his phone and started frantically typing something into Messenger. Brandon froze like a dog. He turned his head left and right. Then he signaled his coworker to freeze. Quietly, slowly. Brandon walked over to the new closet, swung it open. What a meeting. The girl said, looking at the millionaire, glad to meet you. And here I am, hiding from my employer's prying eyes. Who the hell are you? He roared as he approached her. I'll throw you out the window. Don't touch her, Mr. Joe. Stanley warned, grabbing the landlord by the arm. She's a journalist. Worked for a millionaire. But give me the phone. Late is late, smiled the girl, showing her iPhone. Too late, because I already sent the memo. God bless America. This time, Mr. John didn't collapse to the floor, but his face became so pale you could see the patterns of blood vessels on it. America only smiled as she watched him suffer. She loved to watch the masters of life suffer. Brandon hated the press, but he was the one who had been sent in front of the press, and he didn't dare disobey orders. You have to be careful when talking to the media, even if you're leaving the force, and even more careful if you want to stay on the force. Just one wrong word, one joke, and the newspapermen will instantly hoist your detective soul on their free speech pitchforks. Dear colleagues, said Brandon, I am invited to make a brief statement. The police are investigating Monica's disappearance. This means a criminal trial. A huge amount of evidence has been analyzed. The department is prepared to pay a reward to anyone who has information of value to us. Did the kidnappers make demands? The young journalist asked. She did not identify herself. No demands, the detective replied. No reliable information about the details of the kidnapping. If not a kidnapping, then what is it? Asked the Tolstoy newspaperman, twitching all his chin. No comment, replied Brandon. He loved that word combination. Let's say I'm a kidnapper. The young journalist said thoughtfully. What could I expect? For leniency if you give up the police and fulfill all its requirements, said the detective with a smile. What was happening was beginning to irritate him. More questions. Mr. Brandon. He heard a familiar voice. Rika Smith, special correspondent. Do you confirm that there was also a theft of the national relic of Martha Washington's ring? I do. Brandon nodded. But there's no need to sensationalize it. That ring was stolen 3 weeks ago. I personally put the card in the system of search for valuables. Its cultural status is also unconfirmed, since it hasn't been examined by an expert. The rest is just coincidence and your speculation. The detective immediately invited language, but it was too late. The reporters became animated, like an alligator that had been thrown a piece of meat. He saw the newspapermen rush to their gadgets to scribble notes. Not only was a millionaire's daughter missing, but also a very valuable gizmo. Was Mr. Matta involved in the disappearance of this ring? Rika asked. In the interest of the investigation, this information is confidential, answered Brandon, although he would love to answer the omnipresent journalist indecently. If you know where the ring is or Monica, let me know, smiled the detective. That phrase was superfluous too. Mr. Brent, how much could such a ring be worth? Another reporter blurted out, and the detective decided to take the opportunity to escape. 1000000. If it's real, he answered. The press conference is over. God bless America and give us all strength. At this time, Mr. This was reading an article about himself, instantly covered in sweat. This journalist had, in fact, still a child completely buried in the ground. Not even the top of his head is sticking out. His daughter's kidnapping had taken a back seat. Turns out all of America is now talking about the millionaire who stole George Washington's ring. Angry comments flooded the newswires. Columnists exercised wit, trying to find ever more caustic language to label his failure. Gagliano. Mr. whispered it into the phone. Do I need you urgently? I'm on my way. Encourage, replied the interlocutor. Gagliano could smell money a mile away. Not every lawyer has that kind of nose. And not everyone knows how to interpret signals correctly. Today, when he first heard that the scandal Gagliano, and immediately canceled all business meetings, postponed them for a week ahead. He went to a restaurant near Mr. Matt's residence and waited for the call. When the driver took him to the mansion, the lawyer asked him to stop at a newsstand. So he bought a fresh press, sat in the back seat of his Rolls-Royce, and began flipping through the pages. Gagliano loved the smell of freshly printed newspapers. It took him back to his childhood, when he himself sold the same publications on the streets of New York for $2 a day. That's all in the past now, but the smell of fresh press still lifted his spirits. On the front page, these pages of which were to be adorned with a picture of Joe's daughter in a gorgeous dress, modeled the headline millionaire. Tommen, how has the gentleman encroached upon the history of the states? Gagliano read the entire article and noted to himself that there was nothing to latch onto. The entire piece was built on innocent questions and official police reports. The first ring had indeed been stolen. Second, Mr. confirmed this, that the relic passed through his hairy hands. About the excessive vegetation, it's completely true. All mature Italians suffer from it. A millionaire's third daughter is missing, and he gave her rings the day before. As they say, draw your own conclusions. The only thing that caught the eye of an experienced lawyer is the word clip Ataman. Galliani knew perfectly well medical diagnoses on the pages of the press cannot be published. And yet this is not enough to nail him and make him apologize. What to say about the small news sites that reprinted the news without looking into the details? It seems that by evening all America knew that it had something to do with the disappearance of some national relic. But the public didn't want to understand the rest of the details. They wanted the hot facts. The lawyer walked through the beautiful courtyard with the traces of the failed wedding. The staff of the entertainment agency was dismantling scenes, unfolding tables, assembling chairs. Guards like soldiers covered every entrance and exit to Mr. This mansion and his guest house. Gagliano nodded to one of them, whose face seemed familiar. But he didn't even see a smile in return. What caught his eye was the automatic pistol that was loaded, placed in a holster. Not one that was prepared for defense. A pass was demanded by the guard. "Gentlemen, this is waiting for me," explained the lawyer, showing his card. "Say Galliano is in place. Expect," ordered the guard and ran to his patron. "That one will always be so strict now," Galliani thought, looking around. The guards were giving him unkind looks, and when one of the staff dismantled the scene, approached the mansion, almost beat him. "Where are you going?" angrily asked the hot young man. "Why are you stinking around here?" "I was looking for the restroom," the employee whispered. "What's this? A wedding or a funeral?" Rodriguez shouted. The security guard kicked the underachiever out and blacklisted him. "But I didn't do anything," screamed the hapless entertainment employee. "Let me pack my bags." "You'll get it in the mail," Rodriguez replied. "You're right. The right living his main entrance. Walk faster, or else I'll give you the acceleration now." Galliani, who had been in this hospitable house at the best of times, did not cease to be amazed. First of all, he could not believe that Giuseppe had enemies capable of stealing his daughter. For God's sake, this is America. Here any questions can be settled in court. Secondly, Galliano had never noticed such a huge number of guards. With his experienced eye, he counted 15 men. "Who are you defending yourself against?" "Mr. Galliani," the first guard called out to him, returning from a patron. "Mr. Joe is waiting for you in the library on the second floor. He said you find your own way." "Absolutely." The lawyer nodded and walked past the armed guys. The peaceful man. He hated it when they tried to settle things with guns. The tables inside the house had not yet been dismantled. They were still filled with snacks and drinks, and Galliano couldn't resist a cookie with black caviar. A compact refrigerator and a closet was set up for the treat. The lawyer only had to lift the lid and put the delicacy with a silver spoon. He loved to eat deliciously. Therefore, so many culinary masterpieces made his eyes go wild. Even a sandwich. He went up to the second floor and saw the master of the house. The gentleman was hard to look at. This large, strong man was literally hustling. Bags appeared under his eyes. He was also wiping the sweat from his forehead. Gagliano came up to him and shook his hand warmly. And then they embraced. "I'm sorry, friend," said we. "I'm sorry I didn't invite you to my daughter's wedding." "It's nothing." The lawyer waved his hand. "I think you had enough troubles not to old friends. Besides, I was supposed to have an important meeting tonight, but I canceled it." "I'm in trouble," said the millionaire. Like I didn't hear him. "You must have heard my daughter's missing, right?" "Of course I did," nodded Galliani. "I wanted to tell you right away that all negotiations should be conducted by the police. Alas, it is more difficult to negotiate with criminals than with the most rusty gambler." "No calls yet." Mata sighed. "I called you for another matter. They can't make a formal charge." The lawyer nodded. He was all too aware of the consequences if the story of this ancient ring did get spun. "We could have this arrested, and not for a token 6 months, but for a considerable period of time. This story with Washington's ring is a nightmare." Galliani said, "Did you do the right thing to call me? You could go to jail for stealing something like that. Certainly a man with Italian roots. But I didn't know." Screaming Giuseppe, "Damn it. There have been so many presidents in the history of this glorious country. How do I know some ring was stolen?" "Take it easy." Joe calmed down. It was Gagliano's lawyer whispering. "I've pulled you out of the sludge before. And this time, I'm asking you to keep your voice down." "That's it," said Joe, lowering his voice 2 times, even quieter. The lawyer asked. Through his channels, he learned that a journalist had infiltrated the house to this, under the guise of a waitress. Of course, letting so many people into his mansion was a huge risk. If he had consulted Galliani, he would have said, "The wedding should be celebrated anywhere but here, away from home." Now he had to be careful. What if another left-wing journalist overheard them? "That's it," whispered the millionaire. "Yes," agreed Galliano perfectly. "Tell me, have you been questioned?" "No," answered it. "There was a conversation with the detective, that's all." The same conversation that this journalist overheard. You see, you have to give a proper statement, don't you? The lawyer advised me. Say you were looking for a present for your daughter, and some adventurer offered you Martha Washington's ring, and you bought it out of pure humor for the sake of a joke, thinking that you are acquiring some kind of everywhere face, not a relic. How much did you pay? 100,000. Answered were 100 grand. Galliani shouted. Oh shit. No, it doesn't work like that. You paid a tenner to a tenner. Got it. Okay. The millionaire nodded. The main thing is not to forget. Do you think I'll go to jail? If you listen to me, no. The lawyer shrugged. When you're called in for questioning. Tomorrow, 2:00 p.m., said we'll go together. You ask. Gigliano chuckled. Now you can't even pee without your lawyer. Eh? There's a way to get you out of this, even make you a hero. How? Asked Matt. He was willing to pay a lot more than the fabulously expensive services of Gagliano to find the ring. The lawyer shrugged. Do you think that these underachievers can really find your daughter? All rich people are the same, Brandon thought. 2:00 didn't pass before the millionaire called an incredibly expensive lawyer to pretend to solve his issues. And now this parasite from the legal world was calling his detective's personal cell phone. How did he get the number? Of course, a man like that would have to be talked to. Like it or not, there was little desire to do so. Mr. Brandon said with a smile to Galliani, starting into the video call. I apologize for the distraction. My client and I would like to assist the investigation. I'm listening. The detective answered only quickly and to the point. We're still looking for Monica. That's what Mr. Joy wanted to say a few words about. The lawyer smiled. He turned the cameras on the millionaire. Mister, it's like he's gotten older, hustling. Detective. Brandon grinned gloatingly to himself. The rich cry too. No, they cry when it becomes obvious that money can't buy something. Like going back in time and righting wrongs. The detective said it, but his voice sounded rusty. Martha Washington's ring, or rather, allegedly Martha's ring, allegedly Martha. Alleged ring. Stop wasting my time. Brandon exploded. We're not talking off the record here. Anyway, it's a goddamn ring. 2 guys brought it to me, said the millionaire. Tom, the former head of security, set me up with them. I fired him today. Brandon's used to his clients not telling him the truth. But when it comes to his daughter, maybe if he'd gotten this information a few hours ago, they'd have moved forward with the investigation by now. Brand sighed and set his tongues, singing indignation within himself. Already he had said something. What were their names? I really don't know these people's names, Matta said. Real names. We've got to remember something. Brendan exhorted him. They probably know the fate of the ring and your daughter. I saw them for the first time, replied the millionaire. He didn't write the volume. He said that some people wanted to sell me something worthwhile. I don't know why I agreed to this stupid meeting. It wasn't really like that. The head of security told me that a real relic of Martha Washington's ring had surfaced on the black market, and Mr. Matt himself was begging for a meeting to sell it. It seemed to him that if his daughter wore such a ring, not a single person in the whole country would dare to challenge his status as a U.S. citizen. One of them was named Rick, pronounced, "We are Thin Rick." Brandon shrieked. He couldn't hide his excitement. Did you guys really mess with Thin Rick? The detective found it increasingly difficult to refrain from the very unprintable expressions for which his department was famous. Think thin. That man wouldn't miss an opportunity to make a big score, and if we also showed him the money. I can see why the kidnappers didn't make any demands. They could wait days, playing a subtle game with a millionaire. That's all. Brandon asked. Or are there any other juicy details? That's it. Exhaled the millionaire. Please find my daughter. The lawyer turned the camera back to his pretty face. The detective noted to himself that this man didn't care about other people's suffering. He hadn't even changed his face when he'd asked him to find his daughter. and Thin Rick's name didn't make any impression on him. "This will make the officer's investigation easier, won't it?" asked Gagliano. "Of course," answered Brandon. "I'll report everything to the prosecutor." Over and out. Gagliano said he would stay at Matt's mansion as long as necessary. The millionaire thanked for his concern, although he did not believe in its sincerity. However, the presence of an old acquaintance was very useful. Mr. Joe now could not relax for a second and was waiting for new blows. Leaving aside the Italian wine, the maitre d' ordered to serve him a bottle of whiskey. He began to consume this drink to recover a little, and at the same time to calculate the losses. So, the wedding of his daughter did not take place. So we can forget about reaching new financial frontiers. Convert the influence in square kilometers of offices and residential apartments will not work. Speaking of influence, after a series of scathing articles, Mr. Mata will be shunned like a leper. He's seen it here in the West. They called it ostracism a culture, an abolitionist culture. Luckily for him, he doesn't have to get movie roles or seek contact with the crowd. So he can just leave managerial positions formally and go into the shadows, and from there he can keep pulling strings. Finally, the most important attack is the risk of ending up behind bars. We've been kicking ourselves for telling detectives about the ring without consulting Gagliano. There was no doubt that the whole thing was played by professionals. First, they forced him to buy the ring, taking advantage of his provincial complexes. Then they sent some actress disguised as an old lady. They set it up so he'd kick her out, but he'd remember her name. And then they stole his daughter. The problem is, he's Giuseppe. It's still at the mercy of unknown intruders. For now, he remains a piece on the chessboard. They continue their game and will soon want the prize money. 1,010,000 at least. That's when he'll show them what Italian integrity is all about. He'll agree to any demands, find the money, and then the wheels will turn. Not a single person will be able to avoid answering what he will do with them. Oh, at this time, a gentleman who was far inferior to us in terms of volume and capital structure was drinking whiskey on the same occasion. But unlike Mr. Joe, he was celebrating success, not counting his losses. In just 2 moves, not just to humiliate his opponent, but to destroy him. Of course, not everything went exactly as the calculating Italian had planned. Some points had to be adjusted on the fly. But revenge, the very dish that should be served cold, turned out to be really juicy. Reading the newspaper headlines and angry comments, Cutthese reveled in their victory. The only question that kept him on his toes was, where had the girl gone? He had actually thought about her kidnapping, had kept the possibility in his mind all along, and had even embedded his own man in the entourage. However, there's no way for those fools to prove anything. Therefore, Mr. Elizabeth only had to sing along with whiskey, eat pickled olives and laugh, rejoicing in his brilliant plan. He'll find the girl, as long as someone who plays his own game doesn't interfere in this story. The clock struck 12. Stanley and Brendan continued to sit in the office, analyzing the information. The kidnapping required total concentration as the clock ticked down. In such moments of peak time, one descends to the bottom of Maslow's pyramid of needs. After a week of work at the reel, Stanley was ready to sell his soul for a hot shower and a bed with fresh linen. That's the reason he's quitting. And Brandon seemed to be able to endure any hardship, not a man but a machine. He held a complex dialogue with 3 informants at once. This job was like a chess game with several opponents at the same time, and Brenton was nearing the endgame, moving into the endgame. He's about to checkmate and checkmate at the same time. "Bingo!" shouted the detective. "I found her." "Who?" Stanley was surprised. "Our girl," answered Brandon. "But it's gonna cost me a lot of money." "Oh well, let's get in the transport. We're gonna get her. Just the 2 of us?" Stanley asked. "Are you crazy? Let's call in a SWAT team for force support. I've got 2 flak jackets in the trunk," Brandon shrugged, "and a shotgun. You can take the helmet if you want." "I'm not going anywhere," Stanley cut him off. I've already dropped a support request from mine. Brandon smiled. Or I'll go alone. With those words, he slipped his jacket over his shoulders and rushed out the door. Stanley cursed, put his hat on his head, and ran after him. Brandon, in spite of his stature, was moving very righteously. Stanley rushed after him on his long legs, cursing his partner. "Where'd you get the information?" he asked. "And what's the rush?" "From an informant," answered Brandon. "We got about 20 minutes, no more." The detectives drove through the night city, both the Buick and Brendan literally swallowing up the kilometers. He was accelerating at an obscene speed, and Stanley prayed they didn't hit some pole or manhole. "Where are we going?" Stanley asked. "Let's go easy on the warehouses," Brendan replied. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed his partner patting his pockets. "Did you forget your cell phone?" "Uh-huh," Stanley nodded. "Oh, shit. This is all your fault." "While we were running down the stairs, I dropped the boss," Brandon replied. "Didn't you get Churko off in time?" Stanley was silent. They drove into some kind of industrial development. In the dark, the detective couldn't recognize the place anyway. Brandon turned off the engine. Quietly, without slamming the doors, they walked to the trunk. Brand handed him the body armor helmet and picked up the shotgun himself. "Tell me honestly," Stan said, "what's your deal with the river?" "What?" The detective snapped at him. "Did we come here for the girl or what?" Brandon answered, smiling slyly at the girl. "We're after Warehouse 48. That's what the informant said." Out of the corner of his eye, Brandon saw Stanley slam himself back into his pocket to get his cell phone. The detective smiled. "That's how it is. You live with a man for years, and he's a two-faced rat, ready to sell you out for 30 dimes, or something even cheaper. Didn't you tell the river where we were going to torture our millionaire?" Brandon continued, filling the shotgun with ammo. She would never have guessed it herself. "Go to hell," said Stanley. "I didn't do anything, and you hid my phone." "I didn't." "No." Brandon smiled, adjusting his armor, which barely fit his large belly. "Just put it in a drawer so you forget it." "And now what?" Stanley asked. "You gonna turn me in?" "No, worse," said his partner. "We find the girl. I'll file a report and go back to your corrupt journalists." He jerked the bolt spectacularly, putting a cartridge in the snick, though the movement was unnecessary. Brandon already knew he wouldn't have to shoot, but he wanted to impress Stanley and show what a beautiful world he was losing. Real male friendship instead of fried facts, instead of stray coins. Something more expensive, a sense of mutual support and respect. "Follow me," Brandon ordered, turning on the flashlight on his shotgun. Together, they stole from around the underground level. Warehouse 48 wasn't hard to find. There was a strip of light shining out from under the door, and someone was playing music inside. Perfect place to rehearse. There was no one around at this time of day. The nearest apartment buildings were miles away. As he got closer and closer to the cherished warehouse, Brandon began to worry that the informant had deceived him. He could hear the gentle strumming of guitars and charming duets of male and female voices. Stanley fell behind. What a rat thought Brendan hadn't even left yet, and already he was starting to care so much about his own ass. The detective crept to the steel door and slipped his finger in the gap between them for a word push and stepped back. The door began to open slowly, slowly, as if a gust of wind had propelled it. The voices died down. Brandon heard footsteps from deep inside the warehouse. Someone was coming to close the door. It made sense, and as the man's hand moved out in search of the handle, the detective nimbly grabbed it, twisted, and pulled it toward him. "Handcuffs." "Stan," shouted Brendan. "Stan, handcuffs." "Dan, you to hell." The clock read 8. Tough morning. Up in bed as early as yesterday. At this time, Mr. Mata thought he was the ruler of the world. He made plans. He was going to grow his capital to obscene levels, and today he's sitting in his underwear on a silk sheet, trying to grasp the shadow of the passing day. So first, let's count the losses. George Rossi called their longtime friendship a mistake and asked not to bother him again. Charles Bianchi publicly disavowed the awarding of a multi-million-dollar contract. Giovanni Greca called to apologize, and for a long 5 minutes told why this conversation would be the last. Luca Moretti ordered a column in 5 leading media outlets on the coast to angrily denounce his former business partner. So it is in all mortal sins, but he had a less than pleasant conversation with Mr. Rinaldi yesterday. Add to that a dozen other, not financial sharks, but a little smaller fish, which yesterday rushed away from him. Yeah, it's time to declare bankruptcy. No, he's got some savings. Enough to live comfortably, enough to travel. He'll have to keep 2 or 3 of the security detail down to the secretary. It's a girl with a funny name of Alex. He liked it, just as long as she doesn't go telling the media about harassment right now. No, she's not. But his biggest loss was Monica, his daughter, his greatest treasure. Still out of reach. What if the mysterious kidnappers found out what relic he gave her and thought the ransom was a lie? Or now they're going to try to screw him over for a sum he doesn't have. There was another possibility. Let the minuscule that the daughter was found just shy of calling early in the morning or did not want to tell the terrible news. Mr. Id remembered that Detective Brenton left his phone and urged to call almost any time of day or night. Well, 800 hours is the legal time to call. He dialed the number, and the cop picked up the phone the second he did. "Did you find my daughter?" "No preamble," asked Mr. Matt. In just one day he had lost so much of what he held dear. "Yes," answered Brandon, briefly. "Found." Then why did Mr. Mitta whisper, "Why didn't you call?" At 200 hours, you showed up for questioning. The detective was lazy. "That's when you'll find out. She's alive," the millionaire asked fearfully. "Fortunately, yes," replied the detective. No more comments on the phone. The receiver beeped, and the connection was cut off. It threw the expensive phone into the wall in a rage. The iPhone bounced on the parquet and like a frog jumped several times. The screen was covered with a network of cracks. Shouted he, and to me ran. When the frightened girl ran into the bedroom, he said, "Call that rascal, call him right now." "Wait a minute. Call him in a few minutes." "Come here, darling, I've got something to do." "I'm listening." Says Mister, "If I find out it was you who hissed, that's if I find out it was me." Calmly replied my nemesis I. Who else was ever going to hear someone? "If I called you, don't play games with me. You kidnapped my daughter." The millionaire stretched angrily. "You planted that ring on me, but you're like a child. I'm not going to talk to you on the phone. Unlike you, Joe, I know all too well the kind of cells that chatty businessmen go to. If I find out you're the one who whispered it, that you set this whole thing up, oh my God, you really don't know anything." I was surprised. "No," Joe answered, completely confused. "And about my nephew, too?" Asked his date. "No, but then quickly go to the main entrance of your pseudo-American mansion. Come on, let's go before it's too late." And hung up. We thought it would be very Italian to shoot him when he's alone and unprotected in such an open place. But he wasn't afraid of death anymore. Why would he want a world without his daughter? And the capital that made a descendant of immigrants with a family name. That's Mr. He staggered across the courtyard of his mansion. The place hadn't been cleaned up after last night's wedding invasion. There were napkins, plastic bottles, leftover dishes, and engraved spoons lying around. The jam he'd ordered the day before. The guards looked away and pretended to be extremely busy bums. And so he reached the main entrance to his estate, swung open the entry gate, spread his arms out to shout, "Shoot. Well, already I'm all yours." But there was no minibus, not even a scooter where a machine gunner could sit. Only on the grass in front of the gate lay a small box. He picked it up and put it in his pocket, though it might well have been a bomb. He walked back into the house, sat down on the sofa, and opened it. In the box was his daughter's ring, or rather Martha's ring to Washington, and a small letter. The millionaire unfolded it and read it aloud. And no one kidnapped me. I'm fine. And I'm happy. P.S. Go to hell. Bye.